Crystal chandeliers shattered against marble floors. Blood dripped from a broken champagne glass. 300 guests stood frozen while the most dangerous man in Seattle grabbed a woman who wasn't his and carried her out through smoke and screaming. That wasn't how the night started. But it's how everything changed. My name is Damien Cross, and for 5 years I've been a ghost living in a mansion built on top of a graveyard. Tonight, I walked into a ballroom I had no business entering and destroyed an engagement I had no right to stop, all for a woman whose name I didn't even know yet. They'll call it obsession. They'll call it madness. But when you've already died once, fear stops meaning anything. If you want to know how a dead man comes back to life, stay until the end and drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Seattle rain hammered against the windows of the Whitlock estate like it wanted inside. Mara stood in front of the full-length mirror wearing a gown that cost more than most people earned in a year, and all she could think about was how badly she wanted to rip it off and run. "Stop fidgeting," her mother snapped from the doorway. Catherine Whitlock crossed the bedroom in 3 sharp clicks of her heels, yanking the silk fabric tighter around Mara's waist until it hurt. "You look like you're attending a funeral instead of your own engagement party." "Maybe I am," Mara muttered. The slap came fast, not hard enough to leave a mark, but sharp enough to sting. Catherine's eyes were cold, practiced. "Your father has worked too hard for this arrangement. Preston Vale is one of the most powerful young men in this city, and you will smile tonight like you're grateful for the opportunity." Mara touched her cheek, tasting copper on her tongue. She'd bitten the inside of her mouth when her mother struck her. "Preston's an entitled piece of garbage who thinks women are trophies. Then you'll look beautiful on his shelf." Catherine smoothed down her own dress, checked her lipstick in the mirror. 25 years old, and you still don't understand how the world works. Power isn't given, Mara. It's taken, and tonight, this family takes it back. The door slammed shut behind her mother, leaving Mara alone with her reflection. She looked like a stranger. The makeup artist had painted someone else's face over hers. Porcelain skin, blood-red lips, eyes lined dark enough to hide the exhaustion underneath. The dress was stunning, she'd admit that much. Champagne silk that caught the light every time she breathed. Diamonds at her throat and wrists that probably cost more than her entire Stanford tuition. But beneath the left bracelet, hidden under 14-karat gold and flawless stones, her wrist was still bruised from where Preston had grabbed her 3 nights ago. "You don't get to say no to me," he'd whispered against her ear, his breath reeking of scotch and entitlement. "Not anymore." Mara had shoved him hard enough that he stumbled backward into the restaurant table, knocking over 2 wine glasses and a candle. The entire place had gone silent. Preston's face had turned the kind of red that preceded violence. Then her father appeared, not to protect her, to apologize to Preston, to make excuses, to promise it wouldn't happen again. And now here she was, 3 days later, about to stand in front of Seattle's elite and pretend she wanted any of this. The house staff knocked twice before entering. Maria, the housekeeper who'd worked for the Whitlocks since Mara was 7. She carried a small velvet box. "Your father asked me to give you this." Maria's voice was soft, apologetic. She knew. Everyone in this house knew what tonight really was. Mara opened the box. Inside sat a pair of emerald earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, the only member of the Whitlock family who'd ever treated Mara like she mattered. "She wouldn't want you wearing these tonight," Maria whispered. "I know." Mara closed the box and set it on the dresser. "But I don't get a choice anymore, do I?" Maria looked like she wanted to say something. Instead, she just squeezed Mara's hand once and left. 20 minutes later, Mara descended the grand staircase of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel ballroom with her father's hand locked around her elbow like a vice. The room was obscene. White roses everywhere, ice sculptures shaped like swans. A string quartet playing something classical and forgettable. 300 guests dressed in designer labels and inherited wealth, all of them watching Mara like she was the main course at a feast. Preston stood at the center of it all, surrounded by his family. He looked good. Mara hated that she had to admit it. Tall, sharp-featured, the kind of symmetrical face that photographed well. Tailored tuxedo. Hair styled within an inch of its life. The smile he gave her was all teeth and no warmth. "You're late," he said when she reached him. Traffic, Mara lied. In a limousine with the police escort? Preston's hand found the small of her back, pulling her close enough that no one else could hear. Don't embarrass me tonight. I'm doing your family a favor by going through with this. Victor Vale, Preston's father, and the reason this entire nightmare existed, appeared beside them with 2 champagne flutes. He was older than Mara's father, but carried himself like a man half his age. Dangerous, connected, the kind of person who made problems disappear quietly. To new alliances, Victor said, raising his glass. Mara wanted to throw hers in his face. Instead, she drank. The champagne tasted expensive and wrong. Her father, Marcus Whitlock, took the small stage near the quartet and tapped the microphone twice. The room fell silent immediately. That's what money bought in Seattle. Instant attention. Thank you all for joining us tonight, Marcus began, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who'd spent 40 years lying to investors. It's rare that 2 families as distinguished as the Whitlocks and the Vales come together like this. But when my daughter Mara and Preston found each other, I knew we were witnessing something special. Mara felt bile rising in her throat. Found each other. As if this wasn't a transaction negotiated over golf games and scotch. As if Preston hadn't been selected like a business acquisition. Marriage is about partnership, Marcus continued, about building something greater than ourselves, and I have no doubt that Mara and Preston will do exactly that. The applause was polite, rehearsed. Mara scanned the crowd and saw nothing but performance. Women in dresses that cost more than most people's rent, men checking their phones while pretending to care, everyone playing their assigned role in Seattle's endless theater of wealth and influence. Preston's hand moved lower on her back. Possessive. Smile, he whispered. You're making me look bad. Mara turned to face him. Up close, she could see the calculation in his eyes. He didn't love her. He didn't even like her. She was a merger, a chess piece, a way for the Vale family to absorb what was left of the Whitlock empire after her father's company nearly collapsed 2 years ago. You make yourself look bad, she said quietly. Preston's jaw tightened. What did you just... The ballroom doors opened. Not politely, not the way guests were supposed to enter. They slammed open hard enough that the sound echoed off marble walls and made everyone turn. A man stood in the entrance. No, not a man. A force, a presence. The kind of human being who didn't walk into rooms so much as claimed them. Damien Cross. Mara had never seen him in person. Nobody had, not for 5 years. But she knew the face from old magazine covers and news articles that her Stanford professors used to reference when discussing unchecked corporate power. Defense contractor, billionaire. The man who controlled more military technology than some countries. He was supposed to be a recluse, locked away in his waterfront fortress after his wife died in a car bombing meant for him. The rumors said he'd gone insane with grief, that he never left his estate, that he'd become a ghost haunting his own empire. But he was here now, and he was looking directly at Mara. Damien Cross was younger than she expected, maybe late 30s. Dark hair starting to gray at the temples. A face that looked like it had been carved from stone and exhaustion. He wore a black suit that probably cost what most people paid for a car, but he wore it like armor instead of fashion. The entire ballroom held its breath. Victor Vale stepped forward, his smile tight. Mr. Cross, this is unexpected. Damien didn't acknowledge him. His eyes stayed locked on Mara, cutting through 300 people like they didn't exist. Who invited you? Preston demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Even he understood what was happening. Everyone understood. When Damien Cross showed up somewhere, it meant the rules had changed. Damien finally looked at Preston. No one. 2 words. That's all it took. Preston stepped backward like he'd been shoved. Marcus Whitlock appeared, his face red, his politician's smile barely holding. Mr. Cross, I'm not sure what brings you here tonight, but this is a private family celebration. I know what it is, Damien interrupted. His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of calm that preceded violence. I'm here to stop it. The room erupted in whispers. Mara felt her heartbeat in her throat. She didn't understand what was happening. Damien Cross was a stranger. They'd never met, never spoken. He had no reason to be here, no connection to her or her family. But he was walking toward her now, cutting through the crowd like Moses parting the sea. Preston grabbed Mara's arm hard enough to bruise. Stay where you are. Damien stopped 3 feet away. Up close, Mara could see the exhaustion carved into his face, shadows under his eyes, lines around his mouth. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in years, but his eyes were sharp, focused, alive. Let her go, Damien said to Preston. Fuck you, Preston shot back. She's mine. She's not property. She's my fiancée. Not for long. Preston lunged forward, but Victor grabbed his shoulder hard enough to stop him. The older man's face had gone pale. He understood something Preston didn't, something the entire room was beginning to realize. Damien Cross didn't make empty threats. Mara Whitlock. Damien spoke her name like he'd known it forever. Do you want to be here? Every eye in the ballroom turned toward her. This was it. The moment. The question no one had asked her since this entire nightmare began. Her father looked ready to combust. Her mother's face was frozen in aristocratic horror. Preston's grip on her arm tightened until it hurt. And Damien Cross, a man she'd never met, whose reputation alone could destroy governments, stood there waiting for her answer like it actually mattered. Mara opened her mouth. No, she whispered. Then louder. No. The ballroom exploded. Her father lunged toward her, but Damien stepped between them with the kind of movement that suggested military training. Marcus stumbled backward, his face purple with rage. You don't know what you're doing, Marcus hissed at Mara. You're destroying this family. This family destroyed itself, Damien said coldly, the moment you tried to sell your daughter like livestock. Victor Vale stepped forward, his hands raised in false diplomacy. Mr. Cross, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not a game. Damien pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a ring. Not the gaudy 3-carat monstrosity Preston had selected. This was different. A single emerald surrounded by small diamonds. Simple, elegant, old-fashioned in a way that suggested it meant something beyond money. Damien looked at Mara. Marry me instead. The room went silent. Mara stared at him. You're insane. Probably. Damien's expression didn't change. But I'm also the only person in this room asking what you want. You don't even know me. I know enough. What does that mean? Damien glanced at Preston, then at Victor, then at Marcus. When he spoke again, his voice carried through the entire ballroom. I know your father's company is drowning in debt from illegal arms contracts he tried to hide 3 years ago. I know Preston's family bailed him out in exchange for access to your mother's inherited real estate portfolio. I know this engagement has nothing to do with love and everything to do with preventing federal investigators from discovering what both families have been doing. Marcus lunged forward again, but 2 men in dark suits appeared out of nowhere and blocked him. Security. Damien's security. How dare you? Marcus started. I dare because I have the resources to prove it. Damien kept his eyes on Mara. Your father made a deal with the Vales to bury evidence. You're the collateral. The moment you marry Preston, your legal rights transfer. You become complicit. And if the investigation ever surfaces, you'll go down with them. Mara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. That's not... It's true. Damien's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry, but it's true. Her mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Performance tears. Catherine Whitlock could cry on command. Mara, darling, please don't listen to this man. He's clearly unstable. He's right. The voice came from behind them. Everyone turned. A woman stood near the entrance, mid-40s, sharp-suited, carrying a briefcase like a weapon. Mara didn't recognize her. My name is Claire Dawson, the woman said, walking toward the center of the ballroom. I'm a federal prosecutor, and for the past 8 months I've been investigating Marcus Whitlock and Victor Vale for conspiracy, fraud, and illegal weapons trafficking. The room erupted in chaos. Claire pulled documents from her briefcase and handed them to the nearest security guard. These are warrants for your arrest, Mr. Whitlock. Mr. Vale, yours will be served tomorrow morning. We've been building this case for months, but we held off on the arrest because we needed to ensure Mara Whitlock wasn't legally entangled in her father's crimes. Marcus looked ready to collapse. Victor's face had gone gray. Preston grabbed Mara's shoulders, spinning her toward him. You knew about this. Mata. I didn't, Mara said. I swear. She had no idea, Damien interrupted, pulling Mara away from Preston with surprising gentleness. That's why I'm here, to make sure she stays clear of this. Claire nodded. Mr. Cross contacted our office 6 weeks ago with evidence we'd been trying to obtain for months. In exchange for his cooperation, we agreed to delay arrests until Miss Whitlock could be legally separated from her family's assets. Mara looked up at Damien. You've been planning this? Yes. Why? Damien hesitated. For the first time since entering the ballroom, something cracked in his expression, something raw and honest and broken. Because 5 years ago, I watched my wife die because I didn't act fast enough, he said quietly. And when I saw your name on the Vale family's marriage contract 3 months ago, I recognized the same pattern, the same trap. I couldn't save Vivian, but I could save you. Mara's breath caught. Around them, security was leading Marcus and Victor toward the exits. Preston was screaming something about lawyers. Guests were fleeing toward the doors like the ballroom was on fire. And Damien Cross, the most dangerous man in Seattle, stood in the center of the chaos, holding out a ring like it was the only thing that mattered. This is insane, Mara whispered. I know. We don't know each other. We will. I don't understand why you're doing this. Damien's jaw tightened. Neither do I. But 2 months ago I saw a photograph of you at some charity gala. You were standing next to Preston, and you looked... He trailed off. You looked exactly how I felt the day before Vivian died. Like you were drowning, and everyone around you was just watching. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes. So what, you're rescuing me? Like some kind of hero? No. Damien's voice was rough. I'm bargaining. You get protection from your family's crimes. Legal cover, financial security, and I get... What? Mara demanded. What do you get? Damien looked away. A reason to leave my house again. The honesty of it hit Mara like a freight train. She thought about Preston, about her father, about the cage she'd been living in for 25 years, about Stanford, where she'd tasted freedom for 4 years before her parents dragged her back into their world of contracts and appearances and slow suffocation. She thought about the bruise on her wrist hidden under diamonds. And she thought about the man standing in front of her, offering her something that might be worse than what she was running from. But at least it was different. If I say yes, Mara said slowly, what happens next? You come with me, tonight, right now. We announce the engagement tomorrow morning. The media will lose their minds. Your father's legal team won't be able to touch you because you'll be under my protection, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. That's not a plan. It's the only one I have. Mara looked around the ballroom. Her mother was being escorted out by security, still crying her performance tears. Preston was screaming at someone on his phone. The guests who remained looked at Mara like she was a bomb that might explode. She looked back at Damien. If I do this, she said quietly, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't lie to me, ever. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who lie. If we're doing this, whatever this is, I need to know you'll tell me the truth. Damien met her eyes. I promise. Even if the truth is ugly. Especially then. Mara took a shaky breath. Then she held out her hand. Damien slid the emerald ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The remaining guests gasped. Someone's champagne glass hit the floor and shattered. Mara heard her mother screaming her name from somewhere near the exits. But all she could focus on was the weight of the ring and the expression on Damien's face, relief mixed with something that looked almost like fear. We need to leave, he said quietly. Now. Okay. Damien's security formed a circle around them as they walked toward the ballroom entrance. Mara caught a glimpse of her father being led away in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage. Preston was being physically restrained by 3 men while he shouted threats that would probably get him arrested too. And then they were outside. The Seattle rain had turned into a downpour. Damien's car, a black armored Mercedes that looked like it could survive a missile strike, waited at the curb with the door already open. Mara hesitated at the threshold. Damien noticed. You can still change your mind. She almost laughed. And go where? Back to my family? To Preston? Anywhere you want. I'll make sure you're protected either way. Mara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw exhaustion and grief and something broken that might never be fixed. But she also saw someone who'd walked into a ballroom full of enemies to give a stranger a choice. "I'm not changing my mind," she said. She got into the car. Damien slid in beside her, and the door closed. The driver pulled away from the curb immediately, and the Fairmont Olympic Hotel disappeared behind them in a blur of rain and chaos. Inside the car, silence. Mara stared at the ring on her finger. It caught the streetlights as they drove, throwing small flashes of green across the leather seats. "Whose ring is this?" she asked. Damien didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the sound of rain against the windows. "My grandmother's. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to someone who made me feel alive again." He paused. "I didn't think I'd ever use it." "Why did you?" "Because when I saw you standing there next to Preston, I felt something I haven't felt in 5 years." "What?" "Angry." Damien turned to look at her. "Angry enough to leave my house. Angry enough to walk into a room full of people I hate. Angry enough to destroy lives. I've been dead for so long that I forgot what anger felt like. And I realized, if I could feel that, maybe I could feel other things too." Mara didn't know what to say to that. The car turned onto a private road lined with trees. No streetlights. No other vehicles. Just darkness and rain. "Where are we going?" Mara asked. "Home." The word felt strange. Mara hadn't had a real home in years, just houses, addresses, places where other people told her who to be. 5 minutes later, the car stopped in front of massive iron gates. They opened automatically, and the Mercedes rolled through onto a long driveway that curved through manicured grounds. Then Mara saw it, the Cross estate. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, all sharp angles and dark stone, perched on a cliff overlooking the Puget Sound. Lights blazed from every window, but somehow the house still looked cold, uninviting, like a fortress built to keep the world out, or something locked inside. The car stopped at the front entrance. Damien's security opened the door, and rain immediately soaked Mara's silk gown. She didn't care. She stepped out and looked up at the mansion that was apparently her home now. Damien appeared beside her, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Welcome to your cage," he said quietly. Mara turned to face him. "Is that what this is?" "I don't know yet." "Then I guess we'll find out together." Damien's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or something close to it, like he hadn't expected her to be honest with him. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you inside before you catch pneumonia." But just as they reached the front door, Damien's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read something on the screen, and his entire body went rigid. "What is it?" Mara asked. Damien looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. "Preston," he said slowly. "He just posted bail. Already. His family has resources." Damien's jaw tightened. "And according to this, he's sworn to kill anyone who gets between him and you." The rain poured harder. Somewhere in the distance, thunder cracked across the sky, and Mara realized that leaving the ballroom hadn't meant escape. It had meant war. The mansion swallowed them whole. Mara stood in the entrance hall, dripping rainwater onto marble floors that probably cost more than her college education, and all she could think about was Preston's face when the security guards dragged him away from her. The rage. The promise of violence written in every muscle. Damien was already on his phone, his voice low and clipped. "I want full perimeter security. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, the works. If anyone gets within 100 yards of the property line, I want to know about it before they take their next breath." He paused, listening. "I don't care what it costs. Do it now." Mara wrapped her arms around herself. The silk gown clung to her skin, cold and uncomfortable. She looked around the entrance hall, high ceilings, dark wood paneling, artwork that probably belonged in museums. Everything looked expensive and untouched, like a showroom instead of a home. Damien ended the call and turned to face her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're shivering," he said finally. "I'm fine." "You're lying." Mara met his eyes. "Then I guess we're even, because you haven't told me the real reason you did this yet." Something flickered across Damien's face. "I told you. You told me about my father's crimes, about protecting me from prosecution, but that doesn't explain why you were watching me 3 months ago, why you had investigators digging into my engagement, Why you walked into that ballroom tonight like you had something to prove. Damien's jaw tightened. We should get you dried off. Maria can show you to your room. Don't. Mara stepped forward, her wet shoes squeaking against marble. Don't do that. Don't shut down the second I ask a real question. You promised you'd tell me the truth. I said I wouldn't lie. That's not the same thing. It is to me. They stared at each other across the entrance hall. Water dripped from Mara's hair onto the floor. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock chimed midnight. Damien broke first. My wife died because I didn't pay attention, he said quietly. I was too focused on business, too confident in my security. I thought money and power could protect the people I loved. He looked away. I was wrong. And by the time I realized it, Vivian was already dead. That doesn't answer my question. Yes, it does. Damien's voice went cold. I've spent 5 years locked in this house because I couldn't handle the guilt. Couldn't face the world that took her from me. Then 6 months ago, my head of security showed me a file on Victor Vale's latest business dealings. Your father's name was in it, your engagement contract, and there was a photograph of you from some gala. So you looked exactly like Vivian did 3 weeks before she died. Trapped, scared, pretending everything was fine while the walls closed in. Damien finally met her eyes again. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I had my people dig deeper. And the more they found, the more I realized if I did nothing, you'd end up just like her. Mara's breath caught. Dead? Or worse? Married to Preston. Complicit in your father's crimes. Stuck in a life that would kill you slowly instead of all at once. Damien's hands curled into fists. So, yes, I'm using you. I'm using this engagement to give myself a reason to leave this house again. A reason to feel something other than guilt and rage. Is that honest enough? The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack the floor. Mara wiped rain from her face. At least you're not pretending to be a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm barely even human anymore. Then what are you? Damien looked at her for a long moment. Someone who's tired of being dead. Before Mara could respond, footsteps echoed from the hallway. An older woman appeared, late 50s, gray hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing a simple black dress that screamed efficiency. Mr. Cross, she said, her voice crisp, I've prepared the East Wing guest suite for Miss Whitlock. Thank you, Maria. Damien nodded toward Mara. This is Maria Hernandez. She manages the household. If you need anything, ask her. Maria's expression softened slightly when she looked at Mara. You must be freezing, dear. Come with me. I'll get you something warm to wear. Mara wanted to stay, wanted to keep pushing Damien until he told her everything, but exhaustion was catching up to her, and the adrenaline from the ballroom was starting to fade. Okay, she said quietly. She followed Maria through a maze of hallways. The house was massive, too massive for one person to live in. Every room they passed looked perfectly maintained but empty, like a museum after hours. How long have you worked here? Mara asked. 12 years, Maria replied. I started when Mrs. Cross was still alive. What was she like? Maria hesitated. Kind, intelligent. She made this place feel like a home instead of a fortress. She glanced at Mara. Mr. Cross hasn't been the same since she died. I'm not trying to replace her. I know, he knows that too, but… Maria stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. Be patient with him. He's forgotten how to be around people. She opened the door to reveal a bedroom suite that was bigger than Mara's entire apartment at Stanford. King-size bed, sitting area with a fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sound, everything decorated in soft grays and whites. There's a bathroom through that door, Maria said, pointing. I'll bring you some clothes. Are you hungry? Mara realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Starving. I'll have the kitchen send something up. Maria paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Whitlock, I'm glad Mr. Cross brought you here. This house has been dead for too long. Then she was gone. Mara stood alone in the massive bedroom, dripping water onto expensive carpet. She caught her reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. The makeup artist's work had run down her face in black streaks. Her hair hung in wet tangles. The silk gown looked like something dragged out of a river. She looked like hell, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was drowning. Mara peeled off the wet gown and left it in a heap on the bathroom floor. The shower was the size of her Stanford dorm room, with water pressure that felt like getting pummeled by warm fists. She stood under the spray for 20 minutes, washing away makeup and champagne and the feeling of Preston's hands on her skin. When she finally emerged, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Soft gray sweatpants, a Stanford hoodie that looked suspiciously like it had been purchased recently, clean underwear, and socks. Mara picked up the hoodie. It still had the store tags attached. Someone had gone shopping specifically for her arrival. She got dressed and was pulling her wet hair into a braid when someone knocked. "Come in," she called. Maria entered carrying a tray loaded with food. Grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, apple slices, simple comfort food that made Mara's chest ache with something close to gratitude. "Thank you," Mara said. "Mr. Cross said you used to make these for yourself at Stanford when you were stressed." Maria set the tray on the sitting area table. "He thought you might want something familiar." Mara stared at the food. "How does he know what I ate at college?" Maria's expression remained neutral. Mr. Cross is very thorough when he cares about something. She left before Mara could ask what that meant. Mara ate mechanically, barely tasting anything. Her mind was racing. Damien had been watching her for months, long enough to know her habits, her comfort foods, what she looked like when she was scared. It should have felt creepy, invasive. Instead, it just felt sad, like a man so broken he'd forgotten how to connect with people except through surveillance and data. Mara finished eating and curled up in the armchair by the fireplace. The storm outside had intensified, wind rattling the windows, rain hammering the glass. She thought about her mother being escorted out of the ballroom in handcuffs, her father's face when federal agents surrounded him, Preston screaming threats while security held him back. 24 hours ago, her biggest problem was choosing which fake smile to wear to the engagement party. Now she was engaged to a stranger, living in a fortress, and apparently someone wanted her dead. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. She must have fallen asleep in the chair because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows and someone was knocking on her door. Mara jolted awake, her neck stiff from sleeping at a bad angle. "Miss Whitlock?" Maria's voice came through the door. "I'm sorry to wake you, but Mr. Cross asked me to tell you the press is outside." Mara stumbled to the window and looked down. The driveway was packed with news vans, cameras, reporters. At least 2 helicopters circled overhead. "What the hell?" Mara breathed. Maria appeared beside her. "Mr. Cross released a statement 3 hours ago announcing your engagement. The media is calling it the scandal of the decade. He released it without asking me. He said you needed sleep more than you needed to approve press releases." Maria handed Mara her phone. "You have 400 missed calls, most from your mother." Mara's stomach dropped. She unlocked the phone and scrolled through the notifications. Texts from her mother ranged from pleading to threatening. Voicemails from her father's lawyer demanding she return home immediately. Dozens of messages from people she barely knew. Stanford classmates, distant relatives, society contacts, all wanting to know if the engagement was real. And one message from a number she didn't recognize. "You made a mistake. I'll fix it for you. Preston." Mara's hand started shaking. Maria noticed. "What is it?" "Preston." Mara showed her the text. "He's going to come after me." Mr. Cross anticipated that. Security has been doubled. No one gets through those gates without clearance. "You don't understand. Preston doesn't give up when he wants something. And right now, he wants me." "Then it's good you're here instead of out there." Mara wanted to believe that. But she'd seen the look in Preston's eyes last night. Pure rage mixed with entitlement. He'd built his entire identity around getting what he wanted when he wanted it. And she'd just humiliated him in front of Seattle's entire elite. Someone knocked again. Heavier this time. "Come in," Mara called. Damien entered looking like he'd been awake for days. His hair was disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his eyes bloodshot. He wore the same suit from last night, now wrinkled and rain-stained. "You didn't sleep," Mara said. "Neither did you, apparently." Damien nodded toward the armchair. "That's not a bed." "I fell asleep by accident." "That happens in beds, too." Despite everything, Mara almost smiled. "Are you always this difficult?" "Yes." Damien turned to Maria. "Can you give us a moment?" Maria left quietly. Damien walked to the window and stared down at the media circus below. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Do you want out? Mara blinked. What? Last night was chaos. You were scared and desperate, and I gave you an option that seemed better than the alternative. Damien kept his eyes on the window. But now it's morning. The shock has worn off, and you're realizing you traded one cage for another. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Damien finally turned to face her. So I'm asking, do you want out? Because if you do, I'll hold a press conference this afternoon. I'll say the engagement was a misunderstanding. I'll make sure you're financially protected and legally clear of your family's crimes. You can walk away right now with no strings attached. Mara studied his face. He meant it. She could see it in his expression, the same exhausted honesty he'd shown last night when he admitted he was using her. And what happens to you? She asked. Damien's jaw tightened. I go back to being a ghost. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Mara crossed to the window and stood beside him, looking down at the reporters. You know what the worst part about my engagement to Preston was? What? Nobody ever asked if I wanted it. My father decided. Preston assumed. My mother planned the whole thing without once checking if I was okay with it. She turned to face Damien. Last night you asked. That's more respect than I've gotten in 25 years. So no, I don't want out. Something shifted in Damien's expression. Relief, maybe, or something close to it. You're sure? He asked. I'm sure I'm not going back to Preston. Everything else we can figure out. Damien nodded slowly. Okay, then we need to set some ground rules. Like what? Like how much of this is real and how much is performance? Damien's voice was careful, controlled. The media will expect us to act like an engaged couple. Public appearances, interviews, eventually a wedding. We need to decide what happens behind closed doors. Mara felt her pulse quicken. What do you want to happen? I don't know. Damien ran a hand through his hair. I haven't been with anyone since Vivian died. I don't even know if I'm capable of it anymore. The honesty of that statement hit Mara hard. Then we take it slow. We figure it out as we go. No expectations. And if it doesn't work, then at least we tried. Damien looked at her for a long moment. You're very calm about all of this. I'm really not. I'm terrified. Mara wrapped her arms around herself. But I've spent my whole life doing what other people expected. For once, I want to see what happens when I make my own choices. Even if those choices are reckless, especially then. Before Damien could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his entire body went rigid. What? Mara asked. Preston posted bail 2 hours ago. You said that last night. What I didn't say is where he went afterward. Damien's voice went cold. According to my security team, he drove straight to a gun range in Bellevue and spent 90 minutes practicing with a 9mm. Mara's breath caught. He's going to... We don't know what he's planning, but we're not taking chances. Damien was already texting someone. I'm doubling security again. No one leaves the property without armed escort. I can't live like this. You can and you will, at least until we know Preston isn't going to do something stupid. Mara wanted to argue, but she'd seen Preston's text message. I'll fix it for you. Like she was a problem. A mistake that needed correcting. How long do we wait? She asked. As long as it takes. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Mara barely left her room. The media camped outside the gates 24 hours a day, broadcasting live shots of the mansion and speculating wildly about what was happening inside. Her mother called 60 times. Her father's lawyer sent legal threats. Stanford classmates reached out with messages that ranged from supportive to accusatory. And through it all, Damien remained a ghost in his own house. Mara would catch glimpses of him, walking the perimeter at 2 a.m, standing at windows watching the media circus, talking quietly with security in hallways. But he never came to her room, never initiated conversation beyond brief updates on Preston's movements. It was Maria who finally explained it. He's afraid of you, the housekeeper said on the third afternoon, bringing Mara lunch. Afraid of me? I'm 5'6" and I've never thrown a punch in my life. Not afraid you'll hurt him physically. Maria set down the tray, grilled chicken salad, fresh bread, lemonade. Afraid you'll make him feel things he's not ready to feel. Mara picked at the salad. He's the one who proposed. He proposed to save you, not to start a relationship. Then why keep me here? Because despite everything, he's still human, and humans can't help wanting connection, even when they're terrified of it. Maria paused. Give him time. He'll come around. But that evening, everything changed. Mara was reading in the sitting area when someone knocked. Not Maria's polite tap, but something urgent and sharp. She opened the door to find Damien standing there, looking like he'd seen a ghost. We need to talk, he said. Okay. Not here. Downstairs. My office. Mara followed him through the maze of hallways to a room she hadn't seen before. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk covered in monitors and files, and on one wall, a photograph of a woman, Damien Cross. She was beautiful, dark hair, warm eyes, the kind of smile that made you want to smile back. In the photo, she was laughing at something off camera, her whole face lit up with joy. Mara felt something twist in her chest. This was who she was replacing. A woman who'd been loved so completely that her death had destroyed the man who'd married her. I'm sorry, Mara said quietly. For what? For not being her. Damien looked at her sharply. I didn't bring you here to replace Vivian. Then why did you bring me here? Because... Damien trailed off. He crossed to the desk and pulled out a file folder. I need to show you something, but before I do, I need you to promise me you won't run. Mara's pulse quickened. What is it? Your family's connection to Vivian's death. The room tilted. Mara grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. What are you talking about? Damien opened the folder and spread documents across the desk. Contracts, financial records, shipping manifests, all of them bearing her father's signature. 5 years ago, Vivian discovered that someone in my company was selling illegal weapons prototypes through shell corporations, Damien said, his voice carefully controlled. She traced the operation back to a man named Victor Vale, Preston's father. Mara felt cold spreading through her chest. Victor was involved in killing your wife? Victor orchestrated it, but he didn't work alone. Damien pulled out another document. Your father helped him cover it up. In exchange, Victor bailed out your family's company when it started collapsing under federal investigation. No. Mara shook her head. My father's a bastard, but he's not a murderer. He didn't pull the trigger, but he helped destroy the evidence that would have prevented Vivian's death. Damien's hands were shaking. I've known for 6 months, ever since my investigators connected the dots. That's the real reason I went to your engagement party, not just to save you, to get close enough to your family to gather the evidence I need to destroy them. Mara felt like she was falling. You've been using me. Yes. You lied to me. I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, Mara's voice cracked. You stood in that ballroom and promised you'd be honest with me. And I am being honest. Right now. Damien moved around the desk toward her. I'm telling you the truth, even though I know it means you'll probably hate me. Because you deserve to know what you're caught in the middle of. Mara backed away from him. My father helped kill your wife, and you brought me here knowing that. You put that ring on my finger knowing that. Yes. Why? Damien's expression cracked. Because you're not your father, and I thought... He stopped, started again. I thought maybe I could separate you from what your family did. Maybe I could give you a way out before everything collapsed. But the more time I spent planning this, the more I realized I wasn't just doing it for revenge. I was doing it because I couldn't stand the thought of you ending up like Vivian. Tears burned behind Mara's eyes. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I want you to decide if you can live with this. If you can stay here knowing your father's crimes are connected to my wife's death. If you can look at me and not see a man using you for revenge. Mara looked at the photograph of Vivian, then at the document spread across the desk, then at Damien, who looked like he was barely holding himself together. Do you love me? She asked suddenly. Damien flinched. What? You heard me. Do you love me? Or am I just a weapon you're using against my family? I don't... Damien's voice broke. I don't know how to love anyone anymore. Vivian's death destroyed that part of me. Then what am I to you? Damien looked at her with an expression that was equal parts pain and honesty. You're the first person in 5 years who made me want to try. The silence that followed felt impossible to break. Mara wiped tears from her face. I need time to think. I understand. And I need you to stop lying by omission. If there's anything else I should know, tell me now. Damien hesitated. There's one more thing. What? Elias Mercer contacted my office yesterday. He's asking to meet with you. The name hit Mara like cold water. Elias. Her Stanford boyfriend. The idealistic activist who'd spent 2 years trying to convince her to expose military corruption from the inside. How does he even know I'm here? Mara demanded. He saw the news, and he's been investigating the same weapons trafficking operation that killed Vivian. He thinks you can help him prove Victor Vale is still running it. Is he? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to find out. Mara's head was spinning. Let me get this straight. My ex-boyfriend, who I haven't spoken to in 3 years, suddenly wants to meet with me because he thinks I'm engaged to the man who can expose the corruption he's been chasing. And you're telling me this because if you meet with him, he might tell you things about me that you won't like. And I'd rather you hear them from me first. Like what? Damien's jaw tightened. Like the fact that before I shut down the weapons program, I profited from it. Like the fact that I'm not innocent in any of this. I just decided too late that morality mattered more than money. Mara stared at him. You're telling me you're as bad as my father. I'm telling you I was. And I'm trying not to be anymore. The honesty of it was almost worse than a lie. Mara turned away from him and walked to the window. Outside, the media vans had finally started to thin out. The helicopters were gone. But the iron gates remained closed, and armed security patrolled the perimeter like soldiers. She was trapped here. Not physically. She could leave any time. But legally, emotionally, politically. Leaving meant going back to her family. Back to Preston. Back to a world that would destroy her the moment Damien's protection disappeared. Staying meant living with a man who just admitted he was using her for revenge. There was no good choice, only survival. I'll meet with Elias, Mara said finally. Damien's reflection appeared in the window behind her. Are you sure? No, but I want to hear what he has to say, and then I'll decide if I'm staying here or burning this whole arrangement to the ground. Fair enough. Mara turned to face him. One condition. What? You're there when I meet him. I want you to hear everything he says. No more secrets. No more lies by omission. If we're doing this, whatever this is, we do it honestly or we don't do it at all. Something shifted in Damien's expression. Relief, maybe. Or respect. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. They stood there for a long moment. Two people caught in a conspiracy neither of them had asked for, trying to figure out if honesty was enough to build something real. Then Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his entire face went white. What? Mara demanded. Damien looked up at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw actual fear in his eyes. Preston just broke through the front gates. The security alarm screamed through the mansion like something dying. Damien was already moving before Mara's brain caught up. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the office door, his grip tight enough to bruise. Stay behind me, he said. What's he doing here? I don't know, but we're not waiting to find out. They ran through hallways that suddenly felt too long, too exposed. The alarm kept shrieking. Somewhere downstairs, glass shattered. Men shouted. More glass breaking, closer this time. Damien's phone buzzed continuously in his pocket. He ignored it. They reached the main staircase and Damien stopped so abruptly that Mara slammed into his back. She looked past his shoulder and saw why. Preston stood in the entrance hall, surrounded by broken glass and 3 unconscious security guards. He was holding a gun. Not pointed at anyone, just held loosely in his right hand like an afterthought. His suit was torn. His face was bleeding from a cut above his eye. He looked like he'd fought his way through a war zone to get here. Maybe he had. There you are, Preston said. His voice was too calm, too level. The kind of calm that preceded violence. I've been looking for you. Damien stepped in front of Mara, blocking Preston's view of her completely. You need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving without what belongs to me. She's not property. She was mine first. Preston's hand tightened around the gun. We had a deal. Her family and my family. Legal contracts. Signed agreements. You can't just walk into my engagement party and steal my fiancé like it's a fucking business acquisition. Watch me. Preston laughed. It sounded broken. You think you're untouchable, don't you? The great Damien Cross. The grieving widower who never leaves his fortress. You think hiding in this mansion makes you a king? I think you're trespassing, and if you don't leave in the next 30 seconds, what's left of my security team will make sure you never walk again. Your security team is unconscious. Took me 20 minutes and a lot of pepper spray, but they're down. Preston wiped blood from his eye. Turns out money can't buy loyalty when the checks stop clearing. Damien went very still. What did you say? 3 of your guards took bribes, cash payments to look the other way while I drove through your fancy gates. Preston's smile was all teeth. Even your people know you're a fraud. Behind Damien, Mara felt her pulse hammering in her throat. She could see more security converging from the hallways, at least 6 men, all armed, all moving carefully toward Preston like he was a bomb that might detonate. Preston saw them too. Tell them to back off, he said quietly. No. I will shoot her. Preston raised the gun slightly, not aiming yet, just threatening. I came here to talk, but if you force my hand, you're not going to shoot anyone. Damien's voice was cold, controlled. Because the second you pull that trigger, you're a dead man, and you know it. Maybe. Preston's hand was shaking now. But at least I'll have the satisfaction of knowing you couldn't save another woman you cared about. The words hit Damien like a physical blow. Mara felt him tense, saw his shoulders go rigid. Preston noticed too. His smile widened. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're trying to rewrite history, save the girl you couldn't save 5 years ago. Be the hero instead of the failure. Preston took a step closer. But here's the thing, Cross. You're still a failure. And Mara's going to die just like Vivian did, because you're too broken to protect anyone. Damien moved so fast Mara almost didn't see it. 1 second he was standing on the stairs. The next he was on top of Preston, slamming him into the marble floor with enough force to crack something. The gun skittered across the entrance hall. Security rushed forward, pulling Damien off before he could do permanent damage. But the look on Damien's face was pure murder. Get him out of here, Damien said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. If he comes back, shoot him. Security dragged Preston toward the entrance. He was laughing again, blood running from his nose. You can't hide from this, Preston shouted. Everyone knows what you are, Cross. A coward who let his wife die because he was too paranoid to trust anyone. The doors slammed shut. Silence. Damien stood in the middle of the broken glass, breathing hard, his hands curled into fists. Blood dripped from his knuckles, where he'd connected with Preston's face. Mara descended the stairs slowly. Are you okay? Fine. You're bleeding. I said I'm fine. Mara reached for his hand, but Damien pulled away. Don't. Damien, I need to check the perimeter. Make sure Preston didn't bring anyone else with him. Damien was already walking toward the hallway, not looking at her. Stay inside. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone except Maria. You can't just I can and I will. This conversation is over. He disappeared into the shadows before Mara could argue. Maria appeared from somewhere deeper in the house, her face pale. Miss Whitlock, are you hurt? No, but Damien, he'll be fine. He always is. Maria started picking up broken glass. You should go back to your room. It's not safe down here. Mara wanted to argue, but she could hear shouting outside, security sweeping the grounds, checking for more intruders. The alarm was still screaming. She went back upstairs. Her room felt different now, smaller, less safe. She locked the door like Damien told her to and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. Preston's words kept echoing in her head. You're still a failure. Mara's going to die just like Vivian did. Damien had nearly killed him for saying it. That should have scared Mara. Should have made her question whether staying here was worth the risk. Instead, all she felt was a strange, complicated grief for a man she barely knew. A man so destroyed by his past that he couldn't function in the present. Hours passed. The alarm finally stopped. The shouting quieted. Security finished their sweep and gave the all clear. But Damien didn't come back. Mara tried to sleep but couldn't. She paced the room, checked her phone, more messages from her mother, more threats from lawyers, nothing from anyone who actually cared if she was okay. At 2 a.m, she gave up and went looking for him. The mansion was dark except for emergency lighting along the baseboards. Mara navigated by memory and instinct, retracing the path to Damien's office. The door was open. Damien sat at his desk staring at Vivian's photograph, a bottle of scotch half empty beside him. He didn't look up when Mara entered. "I told you to stay in your room," he said. "I don't take orders well." "I noticed." Mara crossed to the desk. Up close she could see dried blood on Damien's knuckles and fresh bruises forming along his jaw. "You should clean those cuts." "They're fine." "They're not fine. You're going to get an infection." "Good." Mara grabbed the scotch bottle before Damien could pour another glass. "Drinking yourself into oblivion isn't going to fix this. Nothing's going to fix this." Damien finally looked at her, and his eyes were hollow. "Preston was right. I'm a coward who couldn't save his own wife, and now I've dragged you into the same nightmare that killed her." "That's not—" "It is true." Damien stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "Vivian died because I was too paranoid to trust my own security team. I kept changing protocols, firing people, refusing to let anyone get close enough to protect us properly. And when she needed me most, I was locked in a meeting room going over threat assessments instead of being with her." His voice cracked. "I heard the explosion from inside the house. Ran outside and saw the car burning. Saw her—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I saw what was left. And I realized, if I'd just trusted someone, anyone, she might still be alive." Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You can't blame yourself for—" "Who else should I blame? The bombers. They were hired by people who wanted me dead because I wouldn't sell them weapons. Victor Vale, your father. Men who saw me as an obstacle instead of a person." Damien's laugh was bitter. "And the worst part is they were right. I was an obstacle. I stopped the weapons program because it was illegal, not because it was wrong. I didn't care about morality until it cost me everything. You care now. Too late. It's never too late. Tell that to Vivian." Mara crossed to where Damien stood and grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. What happened to your wife was not your fault. You didn't plant the bomb. You didn't pull the trigger. You were a victim, just like she was. I was supposed to protect her, and you tried. You did everything you could. The fact that it wasn't enough doesn't make you a coward. It makes you human." Damien pulled away from her touch. "You don't understand. I've spent 5 years locked in this house because I couldn't face the world that took her from me. I built walls, hired armies, turned this place into a fortress. And tonight, Preston walked through it like it was made of paper. Because 3 guards took bribes." "Exactly. Which proves my point. I can't trust anyone. Not my security, not my employees, not even myself." Damien picked up the scotch bottle and drained what was left. "And I definitely can't protect you." Mara felt something break inside her chest. "Is that what this is about? You're pushing me away because you're afraid I'll end up like Vivian?" "Yes." "Then you're a coward." Damien flinched like she'd slapped him. "Not because you couldn't save your wife," Mara continued, her voice shaking, "but because you're letting fear control your entire life. You're so terrified of losing someone again that you won't let anyone close enough to matter. That's not protection, Damien. That's just slow suicide." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I spent 25 years living in a cage built by my family, following their rules, accepting their version of who I should be, and it almost destroyed me." Mara stepped closer. "Then you showed up and gave me a choice, a chance to be someone else, and now you're trying to take it back because you're scared. I'm trying to keep you alive. By locking me in another cage? By treating me like I'm too fragile to handle the truth?" Mara laughed bitterly. "You're just like my father, just like Preston. You think you know what's best for me without ever asking what I want. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You brought me here to save me from my family, but you're just as controlling as they were, just as willing to make decisions for me instead of with me." Damien's jaw tightened. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to stop protecting me and start trusting me. I want to know everything. About Vivian, about my father's crimes, about what you're really planning." Mara grabbed his hand, ignoring the dried blood on his knuckles. "And I want you to stop treating this engagement like it's just a business arrangement. Because whether you admit it or not, it stopped being fake the moment you walked into that ballroom." Damien stared at her. "You don't mean that." "Yes, I do." "You barely know me. Then let me know you. Stop hiding behind guilt and scotch and 5-year-old ghosts. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack the floor. Then Damien pulled his hand away. I can't. Why not? Because if I let you in and something happens to you, his voice broke completely. I won't survive it. Not again. Mara felt something fracture inside her. So that's it? You're just going to keep me at arm's length until this whole arrangement falls apart? If that's what it takes to keep you safe, yes. That's not safety. That's prison. At least you'll be alive. Mara turned away from him, blinking back tears. She'd spent her entire life fighting against people who claimed to know what was best for her. And here she was again, facing the same wall. I need air, she said. It's 3 a.m. I don't care. She left the office before Damien could stop her. The mansion felt like a labyrinth in the dark. Mara navigated by instinct, looking for an exit that didn't lead to the front gates where security would stop her. She found a side door leading to the garden, unlocked surprisingly, and stepped outside. The night air was cold and sharp. Rain had started again, light drizzle that felt good against her overheated skin. Mara walked deeper into the garden, past manicured hedges and flower beds that probably cost more than most people's cars. She stopped at a stone bench overlooking the Sound. From here, she could see Seattle's skyline glowing in the distance. All those lights, all those people living normal lives, going to work, coming home, making choices that actually mattered. Meanwhile, Mara was trapped in a mansion with a man too broken to let her close and too afraid to let her go. She sat down on the bench and let herself cry. Not the polite tears her mother taught her, ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. She cried for her father's betrayal, for her mother's complicity, for Preston's violence, for Damien's pain, and for herself. For the girl who'd wanted so badly to be free that she'd walked into another cage without realizing it. She didn't hear the footsteps until someone sat down beside her. Mara looked up, expecting Damien. It wasn't. Elias Mercer looked exactly the same as he had 3 years ago. Wire-rimmed glasses, shaggy brown hair, the kind of earnest face that made you want to trust him. He wore jeans and a Stanford hoodie, both soaked from the rain. Hey, Mara, he said quietly. Mara wiped tears from her face. What are you doing here? I heard what happened at the engagement party. Figured you might need a friend. How did you get past security? Elias smiled slightly. Same way I used to sneak into your dorm after curfew. Found a weak spot in the fence and climbed through. Despite everything, Mara almost laughed. That's breaking and entering. Technically, it's trespassing, but who's counting? Elias's expression turned serious. Are you okay? The news is saying some pretty wild things about Damien Cross. Most of it's probably true. That's what I'm afraid of. Elias pulled off his glasses and cleaned them on his wet hoodie. I've been investigating Victor Vale and his weapons trafficking operation for 2 years. Damien Cross's name kept coming up, not as a criminal, as a victim, but also as someone who profited from the same system that eventually killed his wife. Mara felt cold spreading through her chest. What are you saying? I'm saying Damien Cross isn't the hero everyone thinks he is. He shut down the weapons program, sure, but only after he made millions selling illegal prototypes to foreign governments. Elias put his glasses back on. He's not evil, but he's not innocent either. He told me that already. Did he tell you he's still under federal investigation? That the only reason he hasn't been indicted is because he's cooperating with prosecutors to bring down bigger targets? Mara's stomach dropped. No. Did he tell you that marrying you gives him legal protection? That as his spouse, you can't be forced to testify against him? Stop. Mara, I said stop. Mara stood abruptly. Why are you really here, Elias? Elias stood too. Because I care about you, and because I think Damien Cross is using you to save himself. You don't know that. I know he proposed to you less than 24 hours after federal prosecutors told him they were considering charging him as an accessory to weapons trafficking. I know your father's arrest gave Damien leverage to negotiate immunity, and I know marrying you protects him legally in ways nothing else could. Mara felt like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. That's not... He wouldn't he? Elias stepped closer. Think about it. He shows up at your engagement party out of nowhere, proposes in front of 300 witnesses, Get you out of your family's legal mess while simultaneously protecting himself. It's brilliant, actually. Ruthless, but brilliant. You're wrong. Am I? Then ask him. Ask Damien Cross if he's under federal investigation. Ask him if marrying you gives him spousal privilege. Ask him if he's using you the same way your father used you. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to defend Damien, but she couldn't, because everything Elias was saying made horrible, perfect sense. Damien had known about her father's crimes for months, had waited until the perfect moment to intervene, had proposed with a ring that belonged to his dead grandmother, a ring that would make the engagement look romantic instead of strategic, and he'd admitted he was using her, just not for what. Come with me, Elias said gently. Right now. I have a car waiting outside the property. We can be in Portland by morning. You can stay with friends from Stanford while we figure out your next move. I can't just leave. Why not? Because you're engaged to a man you met 4 days ago? A man who's admitted he's using you? It's more complicated than that. It's really not. Elias grabbed her hand. You're doing it again, Mara. Letting someone else control your life. First your father, then Preston, now Damien Cross. When are you going to take control for yourself? Mara pulled her hand away. I need to talk to him first. He'll lie to you, then I'll know. Elias looked at her for a long moment. You're in love with him. I barely know him. That's not a no. Mara wrapped her arms around herself against the rain. I don't know what I am, but I need to hear his side before I make any decisions. Fine. Elias pulled a business card from his pocket. This is my number. When you realize I'm right, and you will, call me. I'll come get you no matter what time it is. He walked away before Mara could respond, disappearing into the darkness the same way he'd appeared. Mara stood alone in the rain, Elias's words echoing in her head. Ask him if he's using you. She already knew the answer. Damien had admitted it. He was using their engagement to get close to her family, to gather evidence, to destroy the people who'd killed Vivian. But was that all? Or was Elias right? Was Damien also using her to protect himself legally? Mara walked back toward the mansion, her mind racing. She found Damien exactly where she'd left him, in his office, staring at Vivian's photograph like it held answers he couldn't find anywhere else. He looked up when Mara entered. Where were you? The garden. It's raining. I noticed. Damien stood. Your hair is soaked. You'll get sick. Are you under federal investigation? The question landed like a bomb. Damien went very still. Who told you that? Answer the question. Mara, yes or no? Are federal prosecutors investigating you for weapons trafficking? Damien's jaw tightened. Yes. The word hit Mara like a physical blow. And marrying me, does that give you legal protection? What? Spousal privilege. Does marrying me mean I can't be forced to testify against you? Damien's expression shifted, understanding, then anger. You talked to Elias. He found me in the garden, and he told me things you should have told me yourself. Like what? Like the fact that you're not just using me to get revenge on my family. You're using me to save yourself from federal prison. That's not... Damien stopped, ran a hand through his hair. It's more complicated than that. Then explain it to me, in simple terms. No more lies by omission. Damien closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked 10 years older. Yes, he said quietly. Marrying you gives me spousal privilege. It means you can't be compelled to testify against me if prosecutors decide to file charges. But that's not why I proposed. Then why did you? Because I meant what I said at the ballroom. I saw you drowning, and I wanted to save you. And saving yourself was just a convenient bonus? No. Damien's voice went cold. Saving myself was the excuse I used to justify doing something that made no logical sense. I'm a defense contractor under federal investigation. The smart move would be to stay as far away from your family as possible. But I couldn't, because for the first time in 5 years, I felt something other than guilt and rage. What did you feel? Hope. The word sounded broken coming from him. Hope that maybe I could do something right. That maybe I could save someone before it was too late. That maybe I wasn't completely destroyed. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes again. You should have told me about the investigation. I know. You should have told me that marrying you would tie me to your legal problems. I know. You should have given me all the information so I could make my own choice. You're right. Damien crossed to where Mara stood and looked at her with an expression that was pure, honest pain. I should have done a lot of things differently, but I didn't. Because I'm selfish and broken, and I wanted you here even knowing it might destroy both of us. Mara stared at him. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't blame you. I don't know if staying here is the right choice. It probably isn't. Then why do you want me to stay? Damien reached up and touched her face with surprising gentleness. Because you make me feel human again, and I'm not ready to give that up. The honesty of it shattered something inside Mara's chest. She kissed him, not gently, not tentatively, hard and desperate and angry, pouring 5 days of confusion and fear and impossible attraction into the contact. Damien froze for half a second, surprise maybe, or shock, then kissed her back with the same desperate intensity. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Her fingers tangled in his hair. They stumbled backward until Mara's back hit the desk, scattering papers and files across the floor. Neither of them cared. Damien's mouth moved from her lips to her jaw to her throat, and Mara heard herself make a sound that was half gasp, half sob. His hands were shaking. So were hers. Then Damien stopped. He pulled back, breathing hard, his eyes dark. We can't. Why not? Because you're angry and confused and you just found out I've been lying to you. His voice was rough. And I can't take advantage of that. I'm not confused. You are. And you have every right to be. Damien stepped back completely, putting physical distance between them. Go to your room, Mara. Sleep. And tomorrow, when you're thinking clearly, decide if you want to stay or if you want to leave. I'll respect whatever you choose. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to close the distance between them and make him stop being noble. But she could see the restraint in his expression, the barely controlled need fighting against something that looked like respect. Fine, she whispered. She left before she could change her mind. Back in her room, Mara locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, her lips still tingling from the kiss. Everything Elias had said was true. Damien was using her. He'd admitted it. But he was also the first person in her entire life who'd given her a choice. The first person who'd told her the truth, even when it made him look terrible. The first person who'd stopped when she was vulnerable instead of taking advantage. Mara didn't know if that was enough. She pulled out her phone and stared at Elias's business card for a long time. Then she saw a new message notification from an unknown number. She opened it. A single photograph appeared on the screen. It showed a woman, early 40s, dark hair, professional suit. She was walking into a federal courthouse carrying a briefcase. Mara didn't recognize her. Then a second message arrived. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Claire Dawson, the prosecutor investigating your fiancée. She just filed sealed indictments tonight. Thought you should know what you're marrying into. A friend. Mara's hands started shaking. She looked up the name on Google. Found dozens of articles about Claire Dawson's successful prosecution of white-collar criminals. Her specialty was weapons trafficking and defense contractor fraud, the kind of crimes Damien had admitted profiting from. A third message appeared. The wedding makes you an accomplice. Leave now, while you still can. Mara dropped the phone like it had burned her. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew about the investigation. Someone who wanted her to run. But who? And why? Mara picked up the phone again with shaking hands and did something she knew she'd probably regret. She texted Elias. Come get me. I'm ready to leave. The response came back immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Pack light. We're not coming back. Mara stood and looked around the bedroom that had been hers for less than a week. The Stanford hoodie hanging in the closet. The books Maria had brought her. The view of the sound through floor-to-ceiling windows. She thought about Damien in his office, staring at his dead wife's photograph. She thought about Preston breaking through the gates with a gun. She thought about her father rotting in a jail cell, and she realized she'd spent her entire life running from one cage into another. Maybe it was time to stop running. Mara grabbed her phone and sent another text. But not to Elias, to Damien. We need to talk, now. She didn't wait for a response. She walked straight to his office and found him exactly where she'd left him, standing at the window, watching rain stream down glass. "I got a message," Mara said without preamble. "Someone sent me a photo of the prosecutor investigating you. They said sealed indictments were filed tonight. They said marrying you makes me an accomplice." Damien turned slowly. His face had gone pale. "Who sent it?" "I don't know. The number was blocked." "Let me see." Mara handed him her phone. Damien read the messages, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up at her with eyes that were suddenly sharp, focused, dangerous. "This wasn't sent by a friend," he said quietly. "This was sent by someone trying to isolate you, make you panic, make you run." "Why would anyone? Because if you leave, I lose my only witness." Mara felt cold spreading through her chest. "Witness to what?" Damien pulled something from his desk drawer. A small leather notebook, old, worn, the edges frayed. "This belonged to Vivian," he said. "I found it hidden in her office 3 years after she died. It contains evidence of the weapons trafficking operation that killed her. Names, dates, financial records, everything prosecutors would need to build a case." He handed it to Mara. She opened it with shaking hands. The first page was dated 5 years ago. Vivian's handwriting was small, precise, methodical. "Victor Vale, meeting with overseas buyers. $4.2 million prototype sale. Shipping manifest attached." Mara flipped through more pages. Each one documented another illegal transaction, another buyer, another shipment. Then she reached the final entries. Marcus Whitlock helped destroy original records. Payment? $2 million plus company bailout. Someone inside Damien's security team is compromised. Can't trust anyone. They know I know. Meeting with federal prosecutor tomorrow. If anything happens to me. The entry ended mid-sentence. Because the next day, Damien Cross died in a car bombing. Mara looked up at Damien, her hands shaking. "My father knew she was going to expose them." "Yes." "And they killed her before she could." "Yes. But if you have this notebook, why haven't you given it to prosecutors already?" Damien's jaw tightened. "Because half the names in that book are people I did business with before I shut down the program. People I sold prototypes to. People whose testimony could put me in prison for the rest of my life." Understanding hit Mara like cold water. "You've been sitting on evidence for 3 years because you're afraid of what it would do to you. I've been sitting on it because giving it to prosecutors means admitting my own guilt, means facing consequences for crimes I committed before I knew better." Damien's voice was rough. "I wanted justice for Vivian, but I also wanted to survive. And I couldn't figure out how to have both. Until I showed up." "Until you showed up." Damien crossed to where Mara stood. "If we get married, spousal privilege protects you from being forced to testify about anything I tell you, which means I can show you everything in that notebook, every name, every crime, and you can decide what to do with the information without legal consequences." Mara stared at him. "You're asking me to be your accomplice." "No. I'm asking you to be my conscience." Damien's eyes were dark, honest, desperate. "I don't trust myself anymore. I don't trust my judgment, but I trust you. And if you decide the evidence should go to prosecutors, even if it means I go to prison, I'll accept that." "Why?" "Because Vivian deserves justice, and I've been too much of a coward to give it to her." The honesty of it shattered Mara completely. She looked down at the notebook in her hands, at Vivian's careful handwriting documenting the corruption that killed her. Then she looked at Damien, broken, guilty, desperate for redemption he didn't think he deserved. "Someone sent me those messages to make me run," Mara said slowly. "Which means someone knows about this notebook. Someone who doesn't want the evidence going public. Victor Vale, or someone working for him." Mara's mind was racing. "If I leave tonight like they want me to, the notebook stays hidden. You stay isolated, and everyone who killed Vivian stays free." "Yes. But if you stay, we have a chance to finish what Vivian started, to expose everyone involved, to make sure her death meant something." Mara closed the notebook. "There's a third option." "What?" "I stay. We get married. I take this notebook straight to federal prosecutors and tell them everything." Mara met Damien's eyes. "Including your crimes." Damien went very still. "You'd send me to prison." "Maybe. Or maybe prosecutors offer you immunity in exchange for testimony against bigger targets. Either way, the truth comes out. And if they don't offer immunity, then you face the consequences of your choices, like an adult. The silence that followed felt impossible to break. Then Damien did something that shocked Mara completely. He smiled. Not a happy smile, a broken, relieved, grateful smile. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay? Okay. We do it your way. We get married. You take the notebook to prosecutors. And whatever happens after that," he stopped, started again. "Whatever happens, at least Vivian gets justice." Mara felt something crack open inside her chest. "You're really willing to go to prison?" "I've been in prison for 5 years. At least this way it would mean something." Before Mara could respond, Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire expression changed. "What?" Mara demanded. Damien looked up at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw actual fear in his eyes. "Preston just posted on social media," he said slowly. "He's outside the gates, with a crowd, and they're demanding we come out and explain ourselves to Seattle." Mara crossed to the window. Damien was right. At least 200 people stood outside the iron gates, lit by news cameras and phone flashlights. Preston stood at the front holding a megaphone, his face still bruised from Damien's attack. He was shouting something Mara couldn't hear through the glass. "What's he saying?" she asked. Damien turned up the security feed volume. Preston's voice filled the office. "Proof that Damien Cross is hiding evidence of federal crimes. Proof that he's using Mara Whitlock to protect himself from prosecution. If he's innocent, why won't he come out and face us?" The crowd roared approval. Mara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "How does he know about the notebook?" "He doesn't. But he knows something, and he's turning public opinion against us." Damien's hands curled into fists. "If we don't respond, the media will assume we're guilty. They'll destroy us before we ever get to prosecutors. Then we respond." "How?" Mara looked at him, at Vivian's photograph, at the notebook still clutched in her hands. "We give them the truth," she said quietly. "All of it. Right now. Tonight." "That's insane." "Maybe, but it's the only move they won't expect." Damien stared at her. "If we do this, there's no going back. Our lives will be torn apart on live television." "They're already being torn apart." Mara straightened her shoulders. "At least this way we control the narrative." For a long moment, Damien didn't move. Then he grabbed his jacket. "Let's go face the wolves." They walked toward the front gates together, two people about to destroy their own lives on camera, and Mara realized with crystal clarity. She wasn't running anymore. She was finally, terrifyingly free. And freedom meant walking straight into the fire. The crowd's roar hit them before they even reached the gates. Mara walked beside Damien across the rain-slicked driveway. Every camera in Seattle trained on them, like weapons. The floodlights were blinding. 200 voices screaming questions, accusations, demands. Preston stood at the front of it all, his megaphone raised like a sword. "There they are," he shouted. "The coward and his captive." The crowd surged forward, pressing against the iron gates hard enough to make them rattle. Damien's security formed a wall between them and the mob, but Mara could feel the barely controlled chaos. One wrong move, and this turned into a riot. "Stay close to me," Damien said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." They stopped 10 feet from the gates, close enough that the cameras could see their faces, far enough that the crowd couldn't reach them. Preston lowered his megaphone and smiled. Blood had dried on his face from where Damien hit him earlier. He looked like a war casualty playing hero. "Damien Cross," Preston said, his voice carrying over the noise. "Finally decided to face the public?" "I'm here," Damien replied. His voice was calm, controlled, the kind of calm that preceded violence. "What do you want?" "The truth. Seattle deserves to know what kind of man you really are." "I'm the kind of man who stops criminals, which is more than I can say for your family." Preston's smile widened. "My family? Let's talk about yours. Let's talk about how you built your fortune selling weapons to terrorists, how you profited from the same system that killed your wife, how you're using Mara Whitlock to protect yourself from federal prosecution." The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Someone threw something at the gates, a water bottle that bounced off the iron bars and landed at Mara's feet. Damien didn't flinch. You're right, he said. The crowd went silent. Preston's smile faltered. What? You're right. I profited from illegal weapons sales before I understood what I was participating in. I made millions selling prototypes to people who used them to kill innocent civilians. And when my wife discovered the truth, she died because I was too arrogant to believe anyone could touch my family. The silence that followed was deafening. Mara stared at Damien. He was confessing, on live television, in front of hundreds of witnesses, destroying himself completely. For 5 years I hid from the consequences, Damien continued. I locked myself in this mansion and pretended the guilt would fade. It never did, because guilt doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just grows until it consumes everything. Preston stepped closer to the gates. So you admit you're a criminal? I admit I made choices I regret, choices that cost me everything I loved, and I've spent the last 5 years trying to find a way to make it right. By kidnapping my fiancée? By giving her a choice you never did. Damien's voice went cold. Mara Whitlock was being sold to your family like property. Her father and yours arranged the marriage to hide their crimes. I didn't kidnap her, Preston. I offered her freedom, something you've never understood. Preston's face turned red. You're lying. I have proof. Damien pulled Vivian's notebook from his jacket. Even from a distance, the cameras could see it. Old leather, worn pages, something that looked important. This belonged to my wife, Damien said, holding it up. She documented every illegal weapons sale, every buyer, every transaction, including deals your father orchestrated and Mara's father helped cover up. The crowd erupted again. Preston lunged at the gates, but security held him back. That's fabricated evidence. You can't. I'm turning it over to federal prosecutors tomorrow morning, Damien interrupted. Every page, every name, including my own, because my wife deserves justice, even if it means I go to prison. Mara felt her breath catch. He was really doing it, confessing everything, destroying his own life to expose the truth. Preston was shouting something, but his voice was drowned out by the crowd. Reporters were screaming questions. Cameras were everywhere. Then Mara heard her own voice. Preston Vale is a liar. Everyone turned to look at her. Mara stepped forward, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. 3 days before my engagement party, Preston grabbed me hard enough to bruise my wrist. He told me I didn't get to say no to him anymore, that I belonged to him. And when I shoved him away, my father apologized to him instead of protecting me. The cameras swung toward her, hungry. My entire life I've been told what to do by men who think they own me, Mara continued. My father, Preston. People who saw me as a transaction instead of a person. Damien Cross is the first man who ever asked what I wanted. The first one who gave me a choice. So yes, I'm engaged to him. And it's the freest I've ever felt. Preston's face twisted with rage. You're brainwashed. I'm awake for the first time in my life. Mara grabbed the notebook from Damien's hands and held it up. This evidence proves your father orchestrated the murder of Damien Cross. It proves my father helped destroy records to cover it up. And it proves you knew about all of it and did nothing because you're just as corrupt as they are. That's slander. It's truth. And tomorrow, federal prosecutors will have every page. Preston grabbed the gates, shaking them violently. You think you're safe behind these walls? You think Damien Cross can protect you? He couldn't even protect his own wife. Damien moved so fast Mara barely saw it. 1 second he was standing beside her. The next he was at the gates, his hand wrapped around Preston's throat through the iron bars. Say her name again, Damien said quietly. I dare you. Preston clawed at Damien's grip, his face turning purple. Security rushed forward, trying to separate them. The crowd was screaming. Cameras captured everything. Mara grabbed Damien's arm. Let him go. He doesn't get to talk about Vivian. Let him go. Something in Mara's voice cut through the rage. Damien released Preston, who stumbled backward, gasping for air. This isn't worth it, Mara said quietly, just for Damien. He's trying to make you lose control. Don't give him what he wants. Damien's hands were shaking. He deserves worse. Maybe, but not here. Not like this. Damien closed his eyes and took a breath. When he opened them again, the rage had been replaced by something colder, more controlled, dangerous. He turned back to the crowd. Preston Vale just assaulted someone through these gates. It's on camera. Every network in Seattle recorded it. So when he tells you I'm the violent one, remember this moment. Preston was still coughing, his hands at his throat. You tried to kill me. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. Damien's voice was ice. This press conference is over. Federal prosecutors will receive Vivienne's notebook at 9 tomorrow morning. Anyone who wants to dispute the evidence can do it in court. He grabbed Mara's hand and turned toward the mansion. But before they could take 3 steps, someone in the crowd shouted, "What about the sealed indictments?" Damien stopped. Mara felt her stomach drop. A woman pushed through the crowd, mid-40s, dark hair, professional suit, the same woman from the photograph someone had sent to Mara's phone. Claire Dawson, the federal prosecutor. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice carrying across the silence. "I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Claire Dawson, and I need to inform you that sealed indictments were filed this evening, charging you with conspiracy to commit weapons trafficking and accessory after the fact to the murder of Damien Cross." The world tilted. Damien's hand tightened around Mara's. "That's not possible. I'm cooperating with your office." "Your cooperation agreement was contingent on full disclosure," Claire interrupted. "But our investigation revealed you've been withholding evidence for 3 years, evidence that could have prevented additional deaths." She pulled documents from her briefcase and held them up. "These are financial records showing continued weapons sales after you claimed to have shut down the program. Prototypes sold through shell corporations, buyers in countries under UN sanctions, all of it happening while you sat in your mansion playing the grieving widower." Damien's face went white. "That's not... I didn't... The evidence says otherwise, and as of 8 p.m. tonight, there's a warrant for your arrest." 6 federal agents appeared from the crowd, pushing through the gates that security suddenly, inexplicably opened. Someone had been paid off. Again. Mara watched in horror as the agents surrounded Damien. "Damien Cross, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit weapons trafficking, accessory to murder, and obstruction of justice." "No." Mara stepped between Damien and the agents. "You don't understand. He was going to give you the evidence tomorrow. He was cooperating." "Step aside, Miss Whitlock." Claire's voice was not unkind. "This doesn't involve you." "It involves me completely. I'm his fiancée. A marriage that hasn't happened yet, which means spousal privilege doesn't apply." Claire nodded to the agents. "Take him." They grabbed Damien's arms. He didn't resist, didn't fight, just looked at Mara with an expression that broke her heart. "The notebook," he said quietly. "Give it to them. Tell them everything." "Damien, promise me." "I promise." They dragged him toward a waiting vehicle. The crowd was going insane, cameras everywhere, Preston laughing like a madman. Reporters screaming questions. Mara stood frozen, the notebook clutched in her hands, watching Damien disappear into the back of a federal car. Then someone grabbed her arm. She spun around and found herself face to face with Victor Vale. Preston's father looked like death, gaunt, gray, barely standing, but his grip was iron. "Give me the notebook," he said. "Let go of me. Give me the notebook or I'll make sure Damien Cross dies in federal custody tonight." Mara tried to pull away, but Victor's other hand produced a gun, hidden under his jacket, pressed against Mara's ribs where cameras couldn't see it. "Nobody has to die," Victor said quietly. "Just hand over the evidence. Walk away. Forget any of this happened. You killed Vivienne. I eliminated a problem, just like I'll eliminate you if you don't cooperate." Mara's mind was racing. Security was 20 feet away, but they were focused on the crowd. The federal agents were leaving with Damien. Nobody was watching, nobody except Elias. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes locked on Mara. He'd seen the gun, she could tell from his expression, and he was moving, slowly, carefully, working his way toward Victor through the chaos. Mara needed to buy time. "The notebook won't save you," she said, loud enough that nearby cameras might catch it. "Federal prosecutors already have copies. Damien scanned every page." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You're lying. Am I? Or are you just desperate enough to believe killing me will fix this? Give me the notebook or I pull the trigger. Then you'll die on camera. Every network in Seattle is recording this. I'm already dead. Stage 4 cancer, 3 months left, which means I have nothing to lose." The gun pressed harder against Mara's ribs, and Mara realized he meant it. Victor Vale was dying. which made him more dangerous than anyone else in Seattle. Okay, Mara said quietly. You win. She held out the notebook. Victor reached for it with his free hand. Then Elias hit him from behind. The impact sent all three of them sprawling. The gun went off, a sharp crack that made the crowd scream. The notebook flew from Mara's hands, pages scattering across wet pavement. Mara scrambled backward, her ears ringing. Security finally reacted, rushing toward them. But Victor was faster. He grabbed the gun and fired twice more, both shots hitting security guards in the chest. People were running, screaming, cameras capturing everything. Victor stood in the middle of it all, blood pouring from a cut on his forehead where he'd hit the pavement. He raised the gun toward Mara. This is your fault, he said. All of it. If you just married Preston like you were supposed to. Elias tackled him again. They hit the ground hard. The gun skidded away. Victor was 65 and dying, but he fought like a man possessed. His fist connected with Elias's jaw, then his throat. Elias gasped for air. Victor grabbed a piece of broken glass from the scattered debris and raised it like a knife. Mara didn't think. She grabbed the gun, raised it, aimed at Victor's chest. Drop it! Victor froze, the glass inches from Elias's throat. Drop it or I shoot, Mara repeated. Her hands were shaking. She'd never held a gun before, never even thought about shooting someone. But right now, with Elias's life on the line and Damien being dragged away and Vivian's evidence scattered across the pavement, she would do it. Victor saw it in her eyes, the willingness to cross that line. He dropped the glass. Smart girl, he said. Then he smiled. But you're too late. The evidence is ruined. Rain's already destroying the ink. By the time federal agents collect it, half the pages will be illegible. Mara looked down. He was right. Vivian's careful handwriting was bleeding across wet pavement, words dissolving into unreadable smears. Years of evidence, gone in minutes. Victor started laughing. You lose. Damien goes to prison. I die of cancer before trial, and Preston inherits everything. The perfect ending. Mara felt something crack inside her. She'd lost. Damien was under arrest for crimes he'd committed while trying to stop worse ones. Vivian's evidence was destroyed. Victor was dying anyway. Preston would walk free. Everything had been for nothing. Then she heard Elias's voice, rough and hoarse. Check your phone. Mara stared at him. What? Your phone. Check it. Mara pulled out her phone with one hand, the gun still trained on Victor with the other. She had a new message, from Damien, sent 10 minutes ago, right before the agents arrested him. I scanned every page 3 months ago. Files uploaded to secure server. Access code, Vivian 042719. Give it to prosecutors. Finish what she started. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes. He'd known. Somehow, Damien had known this might happen, that the physical evidence might be destroyed, so he'd created a backup. Insurance. She looked at Victor. You're wrong. About what? About winning. Mara held up her phone. Damien scanned the notebook. Every page, every name, including yours. Federal prosecutors will have digital copies within the hour. Victor's face went gray. That's not... It's over. You killed Vivian for nothing. You've spent 5 years running from consequences that were always going to catch you. And now they have. Victor lunged at her. Mara pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the estate like thunder. Victor dropped. Not dead. Mara had aimed for his shoulder, and that's where the bullet hit. But he was down, bleeding, screaming. Security finally reached them, surrounding Victor while paramedics rushed forward. Mara dropped the gun and fell to her knees, shaking violently. Elias was beside her immediately, his arms around her. You're okay. It's over. You're okay. But it wasn't over. Because while paramedics worked on Victor and security cleared the crowd and cameras captured everything, Mara realized what she'd just done. She'd shot someone on live television. Every network in Seattle had recorded it. By morning, she'd be famous for all the wrong reasons. The woman who shot Victor Vale. The woman engaged to a federal criminal. The woman who'd lost everything trying to do the right thing. Claire Dawson appeared beside her, somehow still calm despite the chaos. Miss Whitlock, I need you to come with me. Mara looked up at her. Am I under arrest? No, that was self-defense. Clearly. Claire glanced at the cameras. But I need your statement, and I need that access code Damien sent you. Mara pulled out her phone with shaking hands and showed Claire the message. Claire's expression shifted. surprise, then something that looked like respect. He really was cooperating, she said quietly. He was trying to fix his mistakes, even if it meant destroying himself. Claire studied Mara for a long moment. Come with me. We have a lot to discuss. Mara let herself be led toward a waiting vehicle, but before she got in, she looked back at the mansion, at the iron gates still standing open, at the scattered pages of Vivian's notebook dissolving in the rain, at the place where she'd spent 5 days learning what freedom really cost. Damien was gone, arrested, facing decades in prison for crimes he'd committed before he knew better, but the evidence would survive. Vivian's truth would finally be told, and Mara, for the first time in her life, had made a choice that was entirely hers, even if it destroyed everything. The vehicle door closed and Seattle disappeared behind tinted windows. Somewhere across the city, Damien sat in a federal holding cell, alone, waiting for consequences he'd been running from for 5 years. Mara pulled out her phone and typed a message she knew he probably couldn't receive yet. I kept my promise. The evidence is safe. Whatever happens next, we face it together. She hit send. Then she closed her eyes and waited for the storm to break completely. Because this wasn't the ending. This was just the beginning of the real fight. And Mara Whitlock, the girl who'd spent 25 years being told what to do, was finally ready to burn the whole world down if that's what justice required. The federal building was brutally lit and smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Mara sat in an interview room across from Claire Dawson and 2 other prosecutors she didn't recognize. A camera recorded everything from the corner. Let's start from the beginning, Claire said. When did Damien Cross first tell you about Vivian's notebook? Tonight, a few hours before Preston showed up at the gates. And before that, what did you know about his involvement in weapons trafficking? Mara took a breath. He told me he'd profited from illegal sales before shutting down the program. He told me he was cooperating with your office. He told me marrying me would give him spousal privilege. One of the other prosecutors leaned forward. And you agreed to marry him anyway? I agreed to marry him because he was the first person who gave me a choice. The first person who told me the truth, even when it made him look terrible. Mara met the prosecutor's eyes. My father sold me to Preston Vale like property. Damien offered me freedom, even if that freedom came with complications. Claire made a note. Tell me about the access code. Mara pulled out her phone and showed them Damien's message again. Claire copied down the code and handed it to one of the other prosecutors, who immediately left the room. If the files are legitimate, Claire said, and they contain the evidence Damien claims, this changes everything. What happens to him? That depends on what's in those files. If he was truthful about his cooperation, if the evidence is substantial enough. Claire paused. We might be able to renegotiate his plea agreement. Might? He withheld evidence for 3 years, Miss Whitlock. People died because of weapons he helped distribute. The law doesn't forgive that easily. Even if he's trying to make it right, trying isn't the same as succeeding. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes again. Then what was the point? What was the point of any of this if he still goes to prison? Claire's expression softened slightly. The point is that Vivian Cross gets justice. The point is that Victor Vale and Marcus Whitlock face consequences for murder and conspiracy. The point is that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, and we do it anyway. That's not good enough. It's all we have. The door opened. The prosecutor who'd left returned carrying a laptop. Files are legitimate, he said. Hundreds of pages. Names, dates, financial records, everything Vivian Cross documented before she died. Claire stood and looked at the laptop screen. Mara watched her expression shift. Shock, then anger, then grim satisfaction. Victor Vale orchestrated at least 15 illegal weapons sales, Claire said quietly. Marcus Whitlock helped destroy records for 8 of them. And there are names here I didn't expect. Seattle Police Department, city council members, federal contractors. She looked up at Mara. This isn't just about your father and Preston's family. This is a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top. Mara felt the room tilt. How many people are implicated? At least 40, maybe more. Claire closed the laptop. Miss Whitlock, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay? Are you willing to testify? Against your father, against Victor Vale, against everyone named in these files? Mara didn't hesitate. Yes. Even if it means your family loses everything. Even if it means you're painted as a traitor by half of Seattle? My family deserves to lose everything. And I stopped caring what Seattle thinks the moment I shot Victor Vale on live television. Claire almost smiled. Fair enough. She stood and extended her hand. Mara shook it. Welcome to the most important trial Seattle's seen in 50 years, Claire said. I hope you're ready. I'm not, but I'll do it anyway. That's all anyone can ask. Claire left, taking the other prosecutors with her. Mara sat alone in the interview room, exhausted and shaking and still covered in rain from the confrontation outside Damien's gates. A guard appeared. Miss Whitlock, someone's here to see you. Mara looked up, expecting Elias. It wasn't. Preston Vale stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 lawyers and looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last 6 hours. What are you doing here, Sit? Mara demanded. I need to talk to you. We have nothing to say to each other. Please, Preston's voice cracked. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Mara looked at the guard, who shrugged. Against my better judgment, Mara said. 5 minutes. They moved to a private conference room. Preston's lawyers stayed outside. Preston sat across from Mara and put his head in his hands. My father's dying, he said quietly. I know. He told me everything tonight, after you shot him, while paramedics were working on him. Preston looked up, and his eyes were red. He killed Damien Cross. He ordered the bombing. He destroyed evidence. And I knew. I've known for 5 years. Mara felt cold spreading through her chest. You knew? My father told me right after it happened, said it was necessary, that Vivian was going to destroy everything we'd built, that sometimes you have to eliminate problems before they eliminate you. Preston's hands were shaking. I was 21. I believed him. Or maybe I just didn't care. I was young and rich and stupid enough to think consequences only applied to other people. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm turning myself in. Preston pulled documents from his jacket. This is my full confession, everything I know about my father's crimes, everything I helped cover up. I'm giving it to federal prosecutors tonight. Mara stared at him. Why now? Why not 3 years ago? Why not when Damien first started investigating? Because 3 years ago, I thought I could outrun it. Thought money and lawyers could make anything disappear. Preston's voice broke. Then I saw you shoot my father. Saw you make the choice I was too much of a coward to make. And I realized I've been running for 5 years. And I'm tired. This doesn't fix anything. I know, but maybe it's a start. Mara wanted to hate him, wanted to throw his confession back in his face and tell him it was too little, too late, but she just felt tired. Give your confession to Claire Dawson, she said quietly, and stay the hell away from me. Okay. Preston stood and walked to the door, then he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, I'm sorry. For grabbing you, for threatening you, for being exactly the kind of man my father raised me to be. Apologies don't erase bruises. I know. Preston opened the door. But I'm saying it anyway. He left. Mara sat alone in the conference room, her mind spinning. Preston was confessing. Victor was under arrest. Her father was already in federal custody. The conspiracy was unraveling. And Damien was in a cell somewhere, waiting to find out if cooperation was enough to save him. Mara pulled out her phone and tried calling him. It went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. Federal prisoners didn't get phone privileges immediately, but she left a message anyway. It's me. I don't know if you'll get this, but I need you to know. The evidence worked. Claire has everything. Victor's under arrest. Preston's confessing. It's all coming together exactly how you planned. She paused. And I'm terrified. Because I don't know what happens next. I don't know if you're coming back. I don't know if we'll survive this, but I need you to know, whatever happens, you made the right choice. Vivian would be proud. Her voice broke. I'm proud. She ended the call and put her head down on the conference table. And for the first time since this nightmare started, Mara let herself cry. Really cry. Ugly, exhausted sobs that came from somewhere so deep she didn't know it existed. She cried for Vivian, who died trying to expose the truth. She cried for Damien, who'd spent 5 years destroying himself with guilt. She cried for her own family, corrupt and broken beyond repair. And she cried for herself. For the girl who'd wanted nothing more than freedom and was learning that freedom cost everything. Someone knocked on the door. Mara wiped her face and looked up. Elias stood in the doorway, his jaw already bruising from where Victor had hit him. "Hey," he said gently. "I thought you could use a friend." Mara almost laughed. "Is that what you are? I'm whatever you need me to be right now." Mara stood and crossed to where he waited. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his shoulder. Elias held her while she cried herself empty. "I shot someone," Mara whispered against his chest. "You saved my life. I destroyed everything. You exposed the truth." Elias pulled back enough to look at her. "Mara, you did something no one else in Seattle had the courage to do. You stood up to your own family. You risked everything for justice. That's not destruction. That's revolution. It doesn't feel like revolution. It feels like I'm drowning. That's because you're in the middle of it. But trust me, history will remember this differently." Mara wanted to believe him. But all she could think about was Damien sitting alone in a federal cell, wondering if his cooperation would be enough, wondering if redemption was even possible for someone who'd profited from death. "I need to see him," Mara said suddenly. "Who?" "Damien. I need to see him, talk to him, make sure he knows—" She stopped, started again. "I need him to know he's not alone." Elias hesitated. "Federal prisoners don't usually get visitors for at least 48 hours. Then I'll wait 48 hours. Mara, I'm not leaving him there wondering if anyone cares whether he lives or dies." Mara's voice was steel. "He saved me. Now I'm going to save him, however long it takes." Elias studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. "You're in love with him." "I barely know him." "That's not a no." Mara closed her eyes. "I don't know what I am, except exhausted and terrified and probably in way over my head. That's pretty much the definition of being in love." Despite everything, Mara almost smiled. Then her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "Damien's plea hearing is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m., Federal Courthouse, room 304. Thought you'd want to know. C.D. Claire Dawson." Mara showed Elias the message. "Tomorrow?" Elias said. "That's fast." "Which means they're either offering him a deal or throwing the book at him." "What are you going to do?" Mara grabbed her jacket. "I'm going to be there when he walks into that courtroom, and I'm going to make sure he knows he's not facing this alone." "It's midnight. The hearing isn't for 9 hours." "Then I'll wait outside the courthouse until it opens." Elias laughed quietly. "You really are in love with him." "Maybe. Or maybe I just understand what it's like to need someone when the world's falling apart." She walked out of the federal building into the Seattle night. The rain had finally stopped. The city looked clean and new, like the storm had washed away something toxic. But Mara knew better. The real storm was just beginning. And tomorrow, in a courtroom full of strangers, Damien Cross would find out if 5 years of guilt could be repaid with truth, if redemption was possible for someone who'd profited from death, if love, whatever complicated, impossible thing existed between him and Mara, was strong enough to survive what came next. Mara pulled her jacket tighter and started walking toward the courthouse. 9 hours until dawn. 9 hours until Damien's fate was decided. 9 hours to figure out if she was brave enough to stand beside him when everything fell apart. She kept walking. And somewhere across the city, in a federal holding cell, Damien Cross sat alone in the dark, waiting for morning, waiting for judgment, waiting to see if the woman he'd saved would still be there when the verdict came down. Morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Mara sat on the courthouse steps watching Seattle wake up around her, commuters rushing to work, coffee shops opening their doors, the city moving forward like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Somewhere inside the building behind her, Damien Cross was being processed for his plea hearing, fingerprinted, photographed, reduced to a number in a system that didn't care about grief or redemption or the complicated mathematics of guilt. Elias had stayed with her until 4 in the morning before exhaustion forced him home. He'd offered his couch, his guest room, anything to get her out of the cold. But Mara refused. She needed to be here, needed to be the first thing Damien saw when they brought him into that courtroom, a reminder that he wasn't alone. At 8:30, the courthouse doors opened. Security guards appeared, checking IDs and scanning bags. The first wave of lawyers and court staff filtered inside. Mara stood and brushed off her jeans. She'd been wearing the same clothes since yesterday, soaked through from rain, stained with dirt from when she'd fallen during the confrontation with Victor. She looked like hell. She didn't care. She walked through security and made her way to room 304. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. 20 rows of benches, a judge's bench at the front, 2 tables for prosecution and defense. Everything designed to be efficient and impersonal, perfect for destroying lives quietly. Mara sat in the front row right behind where Damien would sit. Other people started filing in, reporters, federal prosecutors, Preston's lawyers. A few faces Mara didn't recognize, probably family members of other people implicated in the conspiracy. At 8:55, Claire Dawson entered with a briefcase full of documents. She noticed Mara and nodded once. Not friendly, just acknowledgement. Then the bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. All rise, the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Everyone stood. Judge Morrison was 60-something with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had seen every variation of human stupidity. She took her seat and surveyed the courtroom like a general inspecting troops. Be seated, she said. Everyone sat. The bailiff spoke again. United States versus Damien Cross. Case number... The side door opened. Damien walked in, flanked by 2 marshals. Mara's breath caught. He looked terrible, exhausted, unshaven, still wearing yesterday's clothes, now wrinkled and dirty. His hands were cuffed in front of him, a small mercy, probably because he wasn't considered a flight risk, but his eyes were clear, focused, alive. He scanned the courtroom automatically, looking for threats out of habit. Then his gaze landed on Mara. He stopped walking for half a second. The marshals nudged him forward, and Damien moved to the defense table where a public defender waited. They'd given him a lawyer, young, overworked, probably handling 30 cases simultaneously. Not the kind of representation that saved billionaires. But Damien didn't seem to care. He was still looking at Mara over his shoulder. She mouthed 2 words. I'm here. Something shifted in Damien's expression. Not quite a smile, just acknowledgement that he'd heard. Then he turned to face the judge. Judge Morrison opened a file. Mr. Cross, you're charged with conspiracy to commit weapons trafficking, accessory after the fact to murder, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead? Damien's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to review the charges. Guilty. The word came from Damien, not his lawyer. The courtroom erupted. The public defender grabbed Damien's arm. Mr. Cross, I strongly advise against... I plead guilty to all charges, Damien said clearly. His voice carried through the chaos. I profited from illegal weapons sales. I knew what those weapons would be used for, and I sold them anyway. I withheld evidence that could have prevented additional deaths, and I obstructed justice by hiding that evidence for 3 years. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Order! Everyone sit down and be quiet. The room fell silent. The judge looked at Damien. Mr. Cross, do you understand what you're doing? A guilty plea means waiving your right to trial. It means accepting whatever sentence this court deems appropriate. I understand. And you're doing this of your own free will? No coercion, no pressure? Yes, Your Honor. Why? The question hung in the air. Damien took a breath. Because 5 years ago, my wife died trying to expose the crimes I'm guilty of. She gave her life for the truth. And I've spent 5 years hiding from that truth because I was too much of a coward to face it. I'm done hiding. Judge Morrison studied him for a long moment. The prosecution has filed a motion for leniency based on your cooperation. Ms. Dawson. Claire stood. Your Honor, Mr. Cross provided evidence that led to the arrest and indictment of Victor Vale, Marcus Whitlock, and 43 other individuals involved in an international weapons trafficking conspiracy. Without his cooperation, most of these individuals would still be operating freely. But he also profited from that conspiracy. Yes, Your Honor, which is why the government is recommending a sentence of 15 years in federal prison with possibility of parole after 10. 15 years! Mara felt the floor tilt beneath her. Damien would be almost 55 when he got out. Older, broken by a system designed to punish, not rehabilitate. And there was nothing she could do about it. Judge Morrison turned to Damien. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Damien stood. Yes, Your Honor. He turned to face the courtroom, faced Mara directly. I can't undo the damage I caused. I can't bring back the people who died because of weapons I sold. I can't fix the years I wasted hiding instead of fighting, but I can tell the truth, I can face consequences, and I can hope that somewhere, somehow, my wife is watching and knows I finally did the right thing. His voice cracked. Even if it's too late. Mara felt tears streaming down her face. Judge Morrison's expression remained neutral. Mr. Cross, this court recognizes your cooperation and your apparent remorse. However, the severity of your crimes cannot be overlooked. You profited from death and destruction. You enabled violence that killed innocent people. And while your recent actions suggest genuine contrition, they don't erase the past. She paused. Sheikh, I hereby sentence you to 12 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 8. You'll serve your time at a minimum security facility due to your cooperation and lack of violent criminal history. Credit for time served. Do you understand the sentence? Yes, Your Honor. Then we're adjourned. The gavel came down. It was over. 12 years, 8 minimum. The marshals moved to take Damien away, but before they could, Damien turned to Mara one more time. Thank you, he said quietly. Just 2 words, but they contained everything he couldn't say in a courtroom full of strangers. Thank you for being here. Thank you for not running. Thank you for making me feel human again. Then he was gone. Led back through the side door, back to processing, back to a cell where he'd spend the next 8 years of his life. Mara sat frozen on the bench while the courtroom emptied around her. 12 years, 8 minimum. By the time Damien got out, she'd be 33. He'd be almost 50. They'd be strangers living in a world that had moved on without them. The engagement was over before it even started. Miss Whitlock? Mara looked up. Claire Dawson stood beside the bench. I'm sorry, Claire said quietly. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. He saved me, and now he's spending the next decade in prison. He broke the law, repeatedly, for years. He also exposed a conspiracy that would have kept killing people. Mara's voice was shaking. Doesn't that count for anything? It counted for 4 years off his sentence. In cases like this, that's significant. Claire sat down beside Mara. I know you care about him, and I know this feels like injustice, but the law doesn't forgive based on good intentions. It punishes based on actions, and Damien's actions, however well-intentioned now, caused real harm. So that's it? He just disappears into the system? For 8 years. Then he gets a chance at parole, and if he's granted parole, he'll have served his debt to society. Claire pulled a business card from her briefcase. When that happens, if you're still around, call me. I'll make sure the transition is as smooth as possible. Mara took the card. Why are you helping? Because I've been prosecuting criminals for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between evil and stupid. Damien Cross isn't evil. He's just a man who made terrible choices and is finally facing consequences. Claire stood. That's more than most people in his position ever do. She left. Mara sat alone in the empty courtroom, Claire's business card clutched in her hand. 8 years. What was she supposed to do for 8 years? Move on? Forget Damien existed? Pretend the last week hadn't completely shattered her understanding of loyalty and justice and love? She pulled out her phone and stared at the last message Damien had sent her. I scanned every page 3 months ago. Files uploaded to secure server. Access code. Vivian 04 2 719. Give it to prosecutors. Finish what she started. He'd planned for this. Even 3 months ago, Damien had known his cooperation might not be enough, had known he might go to prison, and he'd done it anyway, because Vivian deserved justice more than he deserved freedom. Mara stood and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, Seattle had fully woken up, sunlight breaking through clouds, people everywhere, life moving forward like it always did. Elias waited on the courthouse steps. I saw the news, he said. 12 years. 8 with parole. How are you holding up? Mara didn't answer. She just started walking. Elias fell into step beside her. Where are you going? I don't know. You need food, sleep, probably a therapist. I need to figure out what to do with the rest of my life now that everything I thought I understood is gone. They walked in silence for several blocks. past coffee shops and boutiques and people complaining about traffic. Normal problems, normal lives. Mara couldn't remember what normal felt like anymore. You could come back to Portland, Elias said finally. Stay with friends from Stanford. Take some time to process everything. And then what? Pretend none of this happened? No. Just give yourself space to breathe before you make any major decisions. Mara stopped walking. They'd reached the waterfront, the same view Damien's mansion overlooked, gray water stretching toward the horizon. I can't leave Seattle, she said quietly. Why not? Because he's here, in a prison 50 miles north of the city, and I'm not abandoning him just because the system decided he's worth punishing. Elias grabbed her shoulders gently, forcing her to look at him. Mara, he's going to be in prison for almost a decade. You can't put your life on hold for that long. Watch me. That's not love, that's martyrdom. Maybe they're the same thing. They're really not. Elias's voice was gentle but firm. You deserve to live, to move forward, to find happiness that isn't tied to someone who can't give you anything for the next 8 years. He gave me freedom. He gave you chaos. And now you're confusing trauma bonding with love. Mara pulled away from him. You don't understand. Then help me understand, because from where I'm standing, you met a man a week ago. You've spent maybe 48 hours actually talking to him, and now you're ready to waste your 20s waiting for him to get out of prison. It's not a waste if it means something. What does it mean, Mara? Really? Mara looked out at the water. It means someone finally saw me, not as a transaction or a trophy or a problem to solve, just as a person, and that person risked everything to give me a choice. She turned back to Elias. I'm not waiting for him because I think we're going to have some fairy tale ending. I'm waiting because he deserves to know someone cares whether he lives or dies, and because I need to prove to myself that I'm capable of loyalty. Real loyalty. Not the fake kind my parents demanded. Elias was quiet for a long moment. You're not going to change your mind, are you? No? Then at least promise me you'll take care of yourself, get therapy, build a life that isn't entirely about visiting a prison every month. I promise. Elias pulled her into a hug. You're insane. You know that, right? I've been told. They stood there on the waterfront while Seattle moved around them. After a while, Elias pulled back. I need to get back to Portland, but call me if you need anything. And I mean anything, even if it's just someone to remind you that you're allowed to be happy. I will. Elias walked away. Mara stayed at the waterfront for another hour, watching boats cross the Sound, thinking about everything that had led her here. Her father's arrest, Preston's violence, Damien's confession, Vivian's notebook. A week ago, she'd been engaged to a man she hated, trapped in a life she never chose. Now she was free, broke, alone, tied to a man serving 12 years in federal prison, but free. Mara pulled out her phone and called the federal prison where Damien would be transferred. I'd like to register for visitation, she said when someone answered, for Damien Cross. The process took 30 minutes. Background check, verification of identity, approval pending. But by the end of the call, Mara was registered. First visitation would be allowed in 2 weeks. She hung up and looked at the Seattle skyline. 2 weeks. Then she'd see him again, talk to him, figure out what, if anything, existed between them beyond crisis and adrenaline. And in the meantime, she needed to rebuild her life. Mara started walking again. She didn't have a destination, didn't have a plan. But for the first time in 25 years, the uncertainty felt like freedom instead of drowning. Chuncheb. 6 months later, Mara stood in front of a nondescript building in downtown Seattle and checked the address twice. This was it. The Damien Cross Foundation for Ethical Defense Technology. She pushed open the door and walked inside. The lobby was simple but purposeful, clean lines, minimal furniture. A reception desk where a young woman sat typing. Can I help you? The receptionist asked. I'm Mara Whitlock. I have a meeting with the board. Of course. Conference room B, second floor. Mara took the stairs. Her hands were shaking slightly. This was the first official board meeting since the foundation launched 3 months ago. The first time all the pieces would be in the same room. She entered the conference room and found 5 people waiting. Claire Dawson, Elias Mercer, Maria Hernandez from Damien's estate, a Stanford professor who'd taught Mara about defense ethics, and a former Pentagon official who'd resigned over weapons trafficking corruption. They all stood when Mara entered. "Thank you for coming," Mara said. "Wouldn't miss it," Claire replied. "This is important work." Mara took her seat at the head of the table. 6 months ago, she would have been terrified to lead a meeting like this. Too inexperienced, too young, too unsure of herself. But 6 months of visiting Damien in prison had taught her something. Confidence came from surviving, from making hard choices and living with the consequences. And Mara had survived plenty. "Let's start with funding," she said, opening her laptop. "We've received $3 million in donations since launch, most of it from tech companies trying to improve their public image, some from individuals who read about Vivian's story." The Pentagon official, Richard Chen, nodded. "That's better than projected. Where are we allocating it?" $2 million goes to research grants for ethical weapons development. Focus on defensive technology rather than offensive. $1 million goes to legal defense for whistleblowers in the defense industry. "And the rest?" Claire asked. "Operating costs, salaries, office space?" Maria raised her hand slightly. "What about survivors' funds for families affected by illegal weapons sales?" Mara pulled up another document. "I've been working with international human rights organizations to identify families who lost members to weapons trafficked through the conspiracy Vivian exposed. We're establishing a separate fund specifically for them. Goal is $10 million over the next 2 years." Elias whistled. "That's ambitious." "Vivian died trying to stop weapons trafficking. The least we can do is help the people her killers hurt." Everyone nodded. They spent the next 2 hours going over budgets, grant applications, and operational logistics. It was exhausting and overwhelming and exactly what Mara needed. Purpose. Something bigger than grief or guilt or waiting for a man in prison to serve his time. When the meeting ended, Claire pulled Mara aside. "You're doing good work here," she said. "I'm trying." "It's more than trying. You've built something real in 6 months. Something that's already making a difference." Claire paused. "Damien would be proud." Mara felt the familiar ache in her chest. "Have you heard anything about his parole hearing?" "Not scheduled yet. Earliest would be 7.5 years from now." 7.5 years. Mara would be almost 33. Damien would be almost 50. A lifetime. "How is he?" Claire asked gently. "Surviving. He's teaching other inmates about ethics and responsibility. Apparently he's become some kind of unofficial counselor." Mara smiled slightly. "He says guilt makes a good teacher." "He's right about that." Claire left. Mara stayed in the conference room for a few minutes, looking at the Foundation's mission statement framed on the wall. "In memory of Damien Cross, in pursuit of justice, in hope of redemption." Damien had helped her write it during one of their phone calls. 10 minutes twice a week was all the prison allowed. But they used every second, talking about the Foundation, about her life, about his classes. Never about the future, because the future was too uncertain, too painful to examine directly. So they focused on now, on what they could control, and somehow it was enough. Mara's phone buzzed, a reminder that visiting hours started in 2 hours at the federal prison. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. The prison was exactly as depressing as every previous visit. Gray walls, metal detectors, guards who looked at Mara like she was stupid for caring about an inmate, but she showed up every 2 weeks without fail. Rain, snow, exhaustion, didn't matter, she showed up. The visitation room was crowded, families huddled around small tables, inmates in orange jumpsuits, guards watching everything. Mara found her usual table and waited. 10 minutes later, Damien walked in. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. Thinner, older. His hair had gone almost completely gray, but his eyes were clearer, less haunted. He sat across from Mara and smiled. "You cut your hair!" Mara touched her shoulder-length bob. 3 weeks ago, I was tired of looking like the person I used to be. "I like it." "Liar. You haven't seen me in person for 2 weeks. You have no idea if you like it or not." "I like anything that makes you happy." Mara felt warmth spreading through her chest. The Foundation had its first board meeting today. "How did it go?" "Good. Really good, actually. We approved 5 research grants, set up the Survivors Fund. Claire says we're on track to become one of the leading ethical defense organizations in the country." Pride flickered across Damien's face. Vivian would love that. I know. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Around them, other families talked and laughed and cried. Life compressed into 30-minute increments. I talked to my parole lawyer, Damien said finally. Mara's breath caught. And? He says if I maintain good behavior, I might be eligible for early review in 6 years instead of 7.5. 6 years? Still a lifetime. But less than before. That's good news, Mara said carefully. Is it? Damien leaned forward. Mara, you're 26 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't be spending it visiting a prison every 2 weeks. We've had this conversation. And we'll keep having it until you listen. I'm not leaving. Mara met his eyes. I told you that 6 months ago. I'm telling you now. I'll tell you every visit for the next 6 years if I have to. I'm not leaving. Why? Because you matter to me. That's not a reason. That's an excuse. Mara grabbed his hand across the table. The guard shifted slightly but didn't intervene. Physical contact was allowed. Barely. You want a reason? Mara said. Fine, here's a reason. You're the first person who ever treated me like I was worth more than my last name. You risked everything to give me a choice. And now that you're facing consequences for your choices, I'm not going to abandon you. Not because I'm noble, not because I'm a martyr, but because loyalty means something to me, and I'm loyal to you. Damien's jaw tightened. What happens when I get out? When I'm almost 50 and you're in your early 30s, what happens then? I don't know. That's not good enough. It's all I have. Mara squeezed his hand. I can't promise you a future, Damien. Neither of us can. But I can promise you I'll be here. Every visit, every phone call, every parole hearing, I'll be here. Even if it costs you everything. It already cost me everything. My family, my inheritance, my old life. All of it's gone. And I've never been happier. Damien stared at her. You're insane. Probably. And stubborn. Definitely. And you're going to waste the best years of your life on someone who can't give you anything. You're giving me plenty. You're giving me purpose. The foundation exists because of your wife's courage and your cooperation. Every grant we give, every family we help, that's because you chose truth over freedom. Mara's voice broke slightly. You gave me the most important thing anyone's ever given me. You gave me myself back. So no, I'm not wasting anything. I'm investing in the person I want to be. Damien closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. I don't deserve you, he whispered. You don't get to decide that. I do. And I've decided you're worth it. The guard called time. 30 minutes over. Damien stood reluctantly. I'll call you Thursday. I'll be waiting. He started to walk away, then turned back. Mara? Yeah? Thank you for everything. Thank you for making me brave enough to fight. He smiled, genuine, warm, real. And then he was gone. Mara sat at the empty table for another minute, composing herself. 6 years. She could do 6 years. She'd survived 25 years in a cage built by her family. 6 years fighting for something real was nothing. Mara stood and walked out of the visitation room. Outside, Seattle was gray and drizzling. Typical. But Mara didn't mind. She pulled out her phone and called Maria. It's me, Mara said when Maria answered. Can you add something to the foundation's calendar? Of course. What is it? A memorial for Damien Cross. Every year on the anniversary of her death, open to the public, free admission, will honor her memory and showcase the work being done in her name. Maria was quiet for a moment. That's beautiful. It's necessary. She deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim. She was a fighter, and the foundation needs to reflect that. I'll set it up. Thank you. Mara ended the call and started walking. She didn't have a car anymore. Couldn't afford one on her nonprofit salary. But Seattle had buses and trains and her own 2 feet. And honestly, she preferred it. Walking gave her time to think, to process, to remember who she used to be and appreciate who she'd become. A year ago, Mara Whitlock was trapped in an engagement to a violent man, controlled by corrupt parents, drowning in a life she never chose. Now she ran a foundation dedicated to ethical defense technology. Now she showed up every 2 weeks to visit a man serving time for crimes he'd finally faced. Now she made her own choices and lived with the consequences. Was it perfect? No. Was it easy? Hell no. But it was hers, and that made all the difference. 5 years and 11 months later, Mara stood outside the federal prison waiting for the gates to open. It was early, 6 in the morning, but she'd been awake since 3. Couldn't sleep, too much adrenaline. Today was the day. Damien's parole hearing. After 6 years of good behavior, exemplary conduct, and genuine rehabilitation, the parole board was finally reviewing his case. Mara had submitted letters, character references, documentation of his work teaching ethics classes to other inmates, everything she could think of to prove he'd changed. Now it was up to strangers to decide if 6 years was enough. The gates opened at 6:30. Mara walked through security and made her way to the hearing room. It was smaller than the courtroom where Damien had been sentenced. Just a table, 5 parole board members, Damien in his prison jumpsuit, and Mara in the back row. Damien turned when she entered. He was 44 now, gray hair, lines around his eyes, but he looked healthier than he had 6 years ago. More at peace. He smiled when he saw her. Mara smiled back. The hearing started. The board asked questions. Damien answered honestly. He talked about his crimes, his guilt, the work he'd done inside to become someone better. "I can't undo the damage I caused," Damien said near the end, "but I can spend the rest of my life trying to prevent others from making the same mistakes. I've taught over 200 inmates about ethics and responsibility. I've counseled men who made choices similar to mine. And I've learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing better every single day." The board deliberated for 15 minutes. Then they returned. "Mr. Cross," the board chair said, "we've reviewed your case extensively. Your conduct over the past 6 years has been exemplary. Your rehabilitation appears genuine, and the letters submitted on your behalf paint a picture of someone committed to making amends." Mara held her breath. "However," the chair continued, "the severity of your original crimes cannot be ignored. People died because of weapons you helped distribute. And while 6 years is significant, the board feels it's appropriate for you to serve the full 8 years before release." Mara's heart sank. 2 more years. Damien nodded slowly. "I understand. That said," the chair added, "we're recommending you for a work release program. You'll serve the remaining 2 years at a halfway house with permission to work outside the facility during the day. It's not full freedom, but it's progress." Hope flickered across Damien's face. "Thank you." The hearing ended. Mara waited outside while they processed Damien's transfer paperwork. It would take a few hours, but by tonight he'd be at the halfway house instead of the prison. Progress. Not perfect, but progress. Damien emerged 3 hours later wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 6 years. Jeans, a gray sweater. He looked strange without the orange jumpsuit. Human. He saw Mara waiting and crossed to where she stood. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself. 2 more years. We've done 6. We can do 2. Damien reached out and touched her face gently. "You didn't have to wait." "I know. But you did anyway. I'm stubborn like that." Damien laughed, real, genuine laughter that sounded like relief and joy and disbelief all mixed together. Then he pulled Mara into his arms and held her. Not desperately, not urgently, just held her, like she was something precious that he'd finally been allowed to touch again. "I missed you," he whispered against her hair. "I missed you too." They stood there in the prison parking lot holding each other while the world moved around them. After a while, Damien pulled back. "What happens now?" "Now we figure out the next 2 years. You work. I run the foundation. We have dinner twice a week instead of 30-minute visits every 2 weeks. And after that? After that, we figure out the rest." Damien studied her face. "You're 32 now. I'm aware. You could have had an entire life in the 6 years I've been gone." "I did have a life. I built a foundation. I helped families. I learned who I am when I'm not controlled by other people." Mara grabbed his hand. "And I spent 6 years proving to myself that I'm capable of loyalty, real loyalty, not the performative kind my parents demanded." Was it worth it? Mara looked at him, at the man who'd walked into her engagement party and given her a choice, who'd spent 6 years in prison facing consequences most people in his position never faced, Who'd become someone better because guilt was a teacher instead of an excuse. Yes, she said simply. It was worth it. Damien kissed her. Not like before, desperate and scared and caught in the chaos of crisis. This was different, gentle, honest, real. The kiss of two people who'd survived the worst and were finally ready to try for better. When they broke apart, Damien smiled. I have 2 years at the halfway house before I'm completely free. What do you want to do with them? Mara thought about it. I want you to work at the foundation, help run the programs you designed from prison, talk to researchers, share your story. That's not exactly romantic. Romance is overrated. Partnership is better. Damien laughed again. Fair enough. They walked to Mara's car, a used sedan she'd bought 3 years ago when the foundation started paying her a real salary. Where's the halfway house? Mara asked. Downtown, near the waterfront. Mara started the engine. Then let's get you settled. They drove through Seattle in comfortable silence. The city had changed in 6 years. New buildings, new businesses, same gray sky. But Mara barely noticed. She was too focused on the man beside her, on the impossible thing they'd built out of crisis and guilt and stubborn loyalty. Not love. Not yet. But maybe something better. Trust. The halfway house was exactly what Mara expected. Clean, institutional, monitored. Damien would have a curfew, mandatory check-ins, random drug tests, all the restrictions of someone still serving time. But he could work, could leave during the day, could slowly rebuild a life that didn't revolve around prison walls. Progress. Mara helped him carry his belongings, which amounted to 3 boxes of books and clothes, to his assigned room. Not much, Damien said, looking around the small space. You'll rebuild. We'll rebuild, Mara smiled. Yeah, we will. She stayed until Damien's curfew. Then she drove home to the small apartment she'd rented 4 years ago when living at Damien's estate became too painful. Inside, she made tea and sat by the window looking out at Seattle. 6 years. 6 years of visits and phone calls and waiting. And now, progress. Not the ending she'd imagined when this started, but maybe better. Because nothing about the last 6 years had been easy. Nothing had been smooth or romantic or tied up neatly. It had been brutal and honest and real, and Mara had survived it. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages. One from Maria. Heard about the parole decision. 2 more years is manageable. We're proud of you. One from Elias. Halfway house is still progress. You've done the impossible. Don't forget that. One from Claire. Damien's work release is approved. He can start at the foundation Monday if he wants. Let me know. And one from an unknown number that made Mara's breath catch. This is Preston Vale. I heard Damien got parole hearing today. Wanted you to know, I'm sorry. For everything. I've spent 6 years in therapy trying to become someone better. Still not sure I've succeeded. But I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. Mara stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed a response. Trying is enough. Keep going. She hit send and set the phone down. Outside, Seattle glowed in the fading light. The same city where this nightmare had started 6 years ago. Where Preston had grabbed her wrist. Where her father had tried to sell her like property. Where Damien had walked into a ballroom and given her a choice. It all felt like a lifetime ago. Because it was. Mara Whitlock had died in that ballroom. And someone new had been born. Someone stronger, braver, more herself than she'd ever been allowed to be. Someone who understood that freedom meant making hard choices and living with consequences. Someone who knew that loyalty was a verb, not a feeling. Someone who'd learned that love, real love, wasn't about romance or grand gestures. It was about showing up. Every visit, every phone call, every impossible choice. Showing up even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Mara finished her tea and went to bed. Tomorrow, she'd drive to the halfway house and have breakfast with Damien. Monday, he'd start working at the foundation. And in 2 years, maybe less with good behavior, he'd be completely free. And they'd figure out what came next. Together. Not because the story demanded a happy ending, but because they'd both survived enough to deserve one. And maybe that was enough.